Happy Tuesday, everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, sitting in for Alan Schimmel, and I hope that everybody is having a great day so far. Want to let you know about some of the things we have coming up on today's broadcast. First of all, Alan has an interview with Sergey Lucio of Broadcom, and they're going to be talking about the launch of Broadcom's BizOps Consortium and BizOps Initiative. It's actually led by Broadcom, and Sergey Lucio is going to be giving us an inside look at what's going on with that. Alan also talks to Karthik Rao of Splunk during today's broadcast. They're going to be talking about what's happening at SplunkConf, which is happening all this week. So Karthik Rao, who is the VP of at Splunk, is going to be telling us what's in store at the conference and some of the announcements that are actually going to be made around observability. Also, Alan is going to be talking with Mohan Kampela of Big Panda and Ilan Rabinovich of Datadog. They're going to be talking about a new partnership that the two companies have formed to help organizations better protect their infrastructure. The companies actually have formed a strategic partnership that provides some out-of-the-box integration for the two technologies, Datadog's APM platform and Big Panda's AI ops-powered correlation and automation technology. It's an interesting conversation, and Alan does a great job talking to both of them. After that, we've got Gary Berman, who is our cybersecurity hero comic guy, and he's going to be doing a quick or a very thorough interview with Paul Lee, who is the CISO of a company called Upheld. And they're going to be talking about cryptocurrency, which is just a fascinating topic on all levels, certainly, especially as it pertains to security. So I would definitely want to check out this conversation. Following Gary, I'll be back with a news update. We do the headlines a couple days a week, and so I'll let you know what's happening on the sites. And then I talk to Todd Weber of Optiv Security, and he's been on the show once before, and we had a great conversation about cybersecurity and COVID-19. This is kind of phase 2 of that conversation. We're going to be talking about the possibility of what organizations need to consider if COVID-19 turns into either a seasonal illness or is something that comes in waves, and our workforce, it becomes kind of a rubber band back and forth, home to the office, home to the office, home to the office. What organizations need to consider when they are trying to secure that elastic workforce, if you will. Then after that, I let you guys know about some of the webinars that we have coming up this week on the sites, and in the hopes that we can get you guys involved, and you can schedule some time on your calendars for them. After that, Mitch Ashley of ASG comes on, and he gives his regular analyst corner segment and talking about all things that are related to IT. And then he has a great interview with Keith Stewart, who is the CEO of a company called vArmor. It's going to be a really, really fascinating conversation, so definitely worth checking out. Mike Vizard is on the show today also, and he has an interview with Sunray CEO Brendan Hannigan, a fine Irishman in his own right. They're going to be talking about why security in the age of microservices is going to be so tough, and ways organizations can maybe make some changes to be able to accommodate a more microservices-driven architecture and protecting that. After that, he's going to be talking with the folks over at IBM, specifically Daniel Crook, who's the CTO of the Call for Code segment at IBM, and a company called Agroli CEO, Maniola Moraes, and CTO Ajinkya Talkar. I think I got it right. They're going to be talking about the latest IBM Code for Good initiative, which this one deals with agriculture and small farming and the impact that IT can have on small farmers adjusting to climate change. So the call for code has to do with that particular topic this year, and they're going to be talking about some of the progress that's being made in that area as well. And I think that's it. So I hope everybody sticks around. We've got a great show for you today. So, but right now we're going to break for a commercial, and then we'll be right back with today's show.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Turn up your CI/CD pipe and put your observability on. Ground control to Major Tom.
10, 9, ignition
Commencing
sequence
countdown, engines on.
6, 5,
Check ignition and may God's love be with you.
1.
All right, guys. First up on TechStrong TV today, we have Alan's discussion with Sergey Lucio. I think I said Lucio in the introduction, so I apologize for that. They're going to be talking about the BizOps Consortium and the BizOps Manifesto. Good stuff, so worth checking out. Give it a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. We're back here for another TechStrong TV segment. We have some interesting news that we're going to be talking about today. New coalition, a new manifesto, and another addition to the kind of the world of DevOps and Agile and so forth. Let me first of all introduce you to our guest. Our guest is Serge Lucio. And I may have mispronounced it, but we do the best we can. Serge is GM, Broadcom Enterprise Software Division. Did we get that right at least, Serge?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Good overview, Alan.
All right. First of all, welcome to TechStrong TV, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yep. So the news is around a new coalition of vendors and others, and a new manifesto around something called BizOps. Is
That's
correct?
Right.
So that's as far as I know right now. Why don't you give us the rest of the story?
So, I mean, if you go back to kind of our transformation over the last 20 years, right? It all started with Agile, kind of almost 25 years ago now. And we've gone through several waves, right? From Agile to DevOps to, if you go back to, 2012, we were all talking about bimodal IT or two-speed IT. By 2016, pretty much everybody was saying, oh, two-speed IT is dead. But nothing really replaced it, right? We recognized some of the challenges of bimodal IT, two-speed IT, but we didn't really formalize how we needed to operate in this new world. And so to us, and several things emerged, right? We started to talk about value stream management. The SRE movement emerged. We started to talk about AI ops as a data-centric kind of approach. But we never formalized kind of what are some of the key challenges that really failed the whole kind of bimodal IT movement. And so to me, BizOps is really about kind of bringing together a lot of these ideas which have really emerged in the last 4 or 5 years into kind of a new manifesto, which is kind of a natural evolution of the Agile manifesto, but really it tries to get to the heart of the problem, which is this alignment between business and IT.
So let me play devil's advocate a little bit. I believe in Darwin, in Darwinism. Things that are wrong fail for a reason. Bimodal IT failed for a reason. And I think that reason was not that there weren't different parts of the organization that moved at different speeds or had different sort of laws of physics that they played by. That's true. There's no getting around that. Bimodal IT failed because they wanted to put the slow kids in the corner with a dunce cap while everyone else ran as fast as they can. And that was a recipe for failure. I think organizations that understood that recognize that what you need is a blend, right? People go as fast as they can. Organizations that were delivering software once a year and now deliver software once a quarter, hey, that's a 400% increase. That's a huge improvement for them. Now, if you're a guy delivering software 10 times a day, big deal, right? Once a quarter, you're slow. So it's not that when we look at what replaced bimodal, I think what we saw was a blend of recognizing, where IT, how it operates.
I think we missed kind of the forest for the tree a little bit. If you look at the gist of the cultural differences, when you talk about Mode 2, fundamentally, Mode 2 is supposed to be about exploration, about discovery, about business outcomes, right? And Mode 1 is supposed to be just run the business. Mm-hmm. The fundamental issue is that culture did not change, right? Even if you look today at a lot of kind of Mode 2 teams, are they really truly focused on the business outcome? Are they measuring their output based on the shoes per minute or trips being booked per hours? Most of these teams are still very much focused on kind of their inside metrics, right? They look at lead time, velocity, number of deployments per hour, right? But do they truly care about the business outcome that they're supposed to be driving? And so that's the fundamental issue. When you basically have people focused on kind of speed and process, which has been kind of a gist of kind of a DevOps movement, as opposed to changing the culture to focus on the business outcome, then you get into all sorts of troubles. It was interesting. I went back to IDC's, 2000. So this was 2017, right? And it was their CIO outlook. And they were saying, 40% of CIOs will advance digital experience initiatives by building organizational linkages with line of business teams and across IT organizational silos. Do we really believe that today, DevOps team, development teams, and IT operations teams and line of business teams are effectively collaborating? I don't see it. And I think the 40% that IDC was forecasting is, I'd be shocked if we're over 20% today.
I'm not going to make an excuse for IDC. I'm not going to defend them. Let them defend themselves. I will tell you this. It's funny. This week, I think it's this week, is Gene Kim's DevOps Enterprise Summit, right?
Right.
Obviously, it's virtual this year. But I've been going for 4 or 5 years now. I see a lot of business, like lines of business. I think the real issue is organizations who do DevOps right and organizations who do DevOps wrong. I think there are some organizations who they focus their success of their DevOps initiatives and their cultural changes and everything else by how many releases a day they do, right? And there's that old adage, speed kills, right? So if you're telling me you've really adopted a DevOps framework and and why, what's the proof in the pudding? I'm releasing 10 times a day. That's not necessarily adopting a DevOps framework. That's just releasing 10 times a day. I think when we look at what real DevOps is, when you talk to a Patrick Dubois or a Gene Kim or John Willis or any of the founders of the DevOps movement and people who are leading the DevOps world today, there's no doubt that DevOps needs to be aligned with the lines of business. And when we measure, unfortunately, or fortunately for them, Dora got bought by Google, right? And so we've kind of lost that whole survey thing that was going on for many years. We were able to plot progress. But one of the things that they certainly plotted was relationship between teams that developed DevOps or teams that adopted DevOps versus profitability, stock prices, other real business metrics that we measure them by. I do think, and look, this is something Broadcom has been involved. I remember talking to the Broadcom folks last year about biz DevOps, as they call it, right? And now today it's biz ops. But yeah, we need greater alignment between business and DevOps. But I'd be hard pressed to find any DevOps person worth their salt who would disagree with that. I think that was always the idea: is you don't do IT to do IT. You do IT to do DevOps and IT to make your business better, right? To improve your business.
So I think this is very true from Gene Kim and the thought leaders. The reality in the world that we live in, and most IT executives I meet, on a regular basis, is very different. I think what we continue to see is a very contractual-based relationship between the business and IT. Whenever we talk about some of these boundaries, right? So we're talking about, one of the fundamental tenets of true DevOps is the feedback loop, right? Yeah. You want to provide, and the reason you deliver, among others, but one of the key reasons why you want to deliver multiple times a day is to be able to provide that feedback. You'd be surprised at how many IT leaders just, when we get to that part of the value we offer as a vendor, just don't care about it, right? We did
Shame on them.
But that's the reality. We did a survey last year with about 600 IT executives, and we had 72% of these executives who told us that for them, the ideal process was to have fully defined requirements before software architecture or design would start. And what's more disturbing is that 70% of these individuals said that it was the ideal process. So I think that one of the challenges we have is that everybody will tell you, yeah, we do Agile, right? We're Agile. Everybody will tell you, yeah, we do DevOps. We've been doing DevOps for 10 years. But have they really transformed their culture to actually really do DevOps or Agile? Do they really adopt an Agile mindset? And so it's not so much that we're trying to create yet another kind of concept with BizOps, but it's really to point to the key challenge, which is this alignment between business and IT.
Got it. We can, and we will, maybe we can schedule a follow-on when we could dig even deeper here, because this is a subject I love to talk about. But I also got to do the news. So let's talk about the launch of the initiative here and the manifesto and everything. It's not a foundation. It's sort of a consortium, or what exactly, how do you call it, seriously?
We call it a coalition, right?
Coalition, okay.
A set of vendors, a set of global system integrators, agile consulting firms. So we kind of try to have kind of a pretty broad set of players who are involved in different kind of aspects to actually define kind of a key values and principles for the manifesto. That's step one. That's what we're announcing today. And if you go to bizopsmanifesto.org, you can see some of these values and principles. And I'm sure for those of us who've grown through the Agile movement, you'll recognize some of these aspects, right? They should not be shocking. The key emphasis is really on kind of the business and the IT alignment aspect of what we're really trying to affect today. And really the hope is that this creates kind of a thrust for both vendors, service providers, digital transformation experts, to kind of align on best practices, tools, technology, to help organizations kind of transform their culture.
Fair enough. And I know, just off the top of my head, some of the folks involved were Dr. Mick Kirsten from TestTop. Help me. What would some of the
so we have
founding members?
Patrick Tickle from PlanView. We have Tom Davenport. We have representatives from AppVance. From a vendor point of view, AppVance, PagerDuty, TestTop. You mentioned PlanView are among kind of the key founding members. And then from Agile consulting side, Scrum.org, Agility Elf, and Capgemini as a representative of a global SI.
And of course, you guys have published a BizOps manifesto, correct?
That's right, and it's available.
So is that a tip of the hat to sort of Agile, or following in the vein of Agile? Because we haven't seen a lot of manifestos done lately. Is it to kind of take that lineage, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we say business, like one of the key values is business outcomes over individual projects and proxy metrics. It to me it takes directly to the heritage of software over. I'm going to miss on that, but you can draw directly parallel to the Agile Manifesto.
Got it. Great. So, I was one of the people who early on fought a war about something called DevSecOps, right? I believed that we needed DevSecOps, right? And there were a lot of people who said, nonsense. It's all DevOps. Security's part of DevOps. And I knew, coming from the security world, that my security people, the security community, they needed to see that word SEC right there in the middle to know that, hey, security was part of DevOps, right? Yes, there's only one DevOps, and we get all of that, but it served as a real reinforcement. And you know what? 5-6 years later, as I sit here, I say DevSecOps. You don't flinch at that, right? You don't think it's right. It's a real thing. It's a thing. It is, and
I completely agree with that. I think we're getting to a phase of everything ops in many ways.
Yeah, that too.
And to me, it's really about kind of this notion of data centricity, right? A feedback loop of alignment across kind of these different silos. So, and when we selected the word BizOps, and the reason why we moved away from Biz DevOps was basically to recognize that it's basically all about business operations, but that encompasses dev,
IT ops, and dev, and
IT ops, everything ops.
Got it.
In reality.
Got it. So it's launched. It's out there. What are the plans? What are you going to do with it? Where do we go?
So I think that there's kind of clearly two thrusts. One is around for the people process side of a coalition to really focus on developing the kind of service engagement trainings that customers could benefit from. So that's definitely a piece of a puzzle. The second one is really on the technology provider side of the house, right? If you think about BizOps, at the heart of it, we have a data problem, right? A lot of the different stakeholders have a lot of data, which is in different silos. We represent our own set of silos. Each tool vendor has its own set of silos. And talking about TestUp, they have been aggregating a lot of data from different set of tools. We happen to have started to do kind of similar things from the AIOps point of view, bringing our competitor products into a true AIOps solution. And so I think there's opportunity for us as vendors to really collaborate, both in terms of the data kind of aggregation, correlation, right? And also start to focus on kind of what kind of analytics do we need to provide on top of the data, which is relevant to address some of the key challenges. So my hope is that we can start to partner with people like TestUp and PlanView and others in the industry to start to define standards and to also start to align our tools so that we can have data interoperability. And what we've seen in kind of within our customer set is that when you are able to show data, right, to different stakeholders who historically were not really collaborating or talking to one another, but from their vantage point, you start to really change the dynamic in terms of how these people talk to one another and how they start to collaborate. So we strongly believe that this focus on data is absolutely key. So that to me is kind of a next natural step. And does it lead us to open source some of our technology? Maybe.
One of the big trends that we're seeing in the DevOps space is what we call observability, right? It's on everybody is, and it really, when we look at observability, it's a lot about what you're talking about, right? It's gathering the data, but it's more than just gathering the data. In today's world, we could gather data till the cows come home. What do we do with that data? How do we how do we analyze it? How do we make decisions from a business point of view as well, based on that data? And we're seeing, as as you're living through surgery, right? We're seeing a tremendous kind of evolution in terms of this observability and how it's influencing. And I do think ultimately it is going to come to feedback loops, right? Because we're going to take that data, analyze it, and create, hopefully, the feedback loops that allow us to be more effective in business, more effective in our IT operations and IT development and everything else. So, it is a good time. It's a great time in the terms of evolution of this whole movement that we've seen going on, quite frankly, for 20 plus years, right, with the start of Agile. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention what's going on with COVID in the world and how it affects this. What, if any, effect has the whole COVID and working remote thing and everything that's gone into it had, if any, effect on this at all?
No, I think it does. I mean, when we think about digital transformation, it's more an imperative today than it was 6 months ago. And so while 6 months ago it was difficult to engage with customers, even on, you need to transform, you're being disrupted by, fintechs or whatever kind of emerging player, I think there was still a lot of inertia. I think at this juncture, and Satya Nadella said it really well when he said that there's been 2 years of digital transformation in the last 2 months. I think what we see with our customers is that there's an imperative to change and transform now. Of course, we're talking cultural transformation, so it's not going to happen overnight. But I think there is way more of an appetite today, which combined with what's been happening in terms of DevOps transformation, combined with kind of technologies that we have been providing or TestUp has been providing in terms of observability, analytics on the data, I think makes it kind of at the right time for really the industry to affect that change.
I agree. Sometimes until there's a gun to your head, you just don't go do it. But when everyone has to go home tomorrow, you kind of got to figure out a way to make it happen. And we certainly have. I think it's been one of the great if there's any silver lining in all of this, right? That we've been able to do that. Anyway, hey, Serge, thank you very much for coming on the show and explaining to us. You know what we didn't mention? There's a website. People can go read the manifesto, find out more about it. Where can they go?
So it's pretty simple. It's bizopsmanifesto.org. We follow agilemanifesto.org, bizopsmanifesto.org. And so you'll be able to read the manifesto, see the coalition, so the main contributors. Jim Kim, you mentioned Gene, is a supporter of a coalition. And if you want to be a signatory, anybody can be a signatory to the BizOps manifesto, which to us is important because we talked a lot about kind of a quote unquote supply side, right? The SIs, the vendors, but we need also large enterprise customers who desire this kind of transformation to also join the movement.
Fair enough. Good stuff. Sergey, thank you for coming to join us on TechStrong TV. Come back, keep us posted on what's going on here with BizOps, and good luck with it. It's going to be interesting to see how it works its way through the industry here and how it manifests itself. No pun intended. All right. Hey, this is Alan Schimmel
Thanks,
from
Alan.
TechStrong TV. Thank you, and good luck. We'll be right back with another guest in just a moment.
All right, welcome back to TechStrong TV, everybody. Next up on our agenda today is Alan's interview with Karthik Rao of Splunk. They're going to be talking about the things that are happening at Splunk Conf this week, including some new announcements around observability. So give this one a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another episode of TechStrong TV. This episode, I have as my guest an old friend I haven't had the chance to interview now in over a year, Karthik Rao. Karthik is a general manager of the Splunk observability platform, or what? Did I get that right?
VP of observability at Splunk. Yes.
Yep, and of course, for those who follow what I do, I had the pleasure of interviewing Karthik a number of times back when he was the CEO of SignalFX, which of course was acquired by Splunk, and Karthik moved over there and is running what's now become known as the observability platform. But a lot of it is the SignalFX kind of foundation. Yeah, Karthik?
Yeah, that's right. We formed the kernel of what has become Splunk's observability initiatives. Yes.
Excellent. Karthik, so before we look, Splunk Conf is coming up this week, and before we jump into that and announcements on what's going on with the Splunk observability platform, let's just, if we can, give our audience just a quick, consolidate the last year for me, Karthik.
Yeah, sure.
Since the acquisition, what's gone on?
Yeah. Well, first, it's great to be here with you again, Alan. It's always great to be on this platform with you. So it's been a very busy year for us. Becoming a part of Splunk. As many of your viewers might know, Splunk historically has been very well known in the IT and the security markets with kind of the core log analytics capabilities. And we came in last year around this time to really help accelerate Splunk's initiatives in the DevOps category, and particularly around monitoring and observability. SignalFX, previously as an independent company, had really focused on developing observability solutions, monitoring solutions for operators of cloud-native applications, and had really focused on different parts of the problem than what Splunk had historically done. And we focused on doing real-time analysis of time series metrics and distributed traces, kind of more in the APM space. And post-acquisition, what we've been able to do is really focus on extending what we had in the core SignalFX product and adding all of the great technology assets that Splunk had to really round out and create a more comprehensive solution for our customers. So there's the kind of obligatory, come into a new company and integrate in the functions and make sure that you kind of get everyone aligned. But we've been making a ton of progress kind of since those first few months and integrating everyone in, and released a bunch of capabilities this year and a lot more here at Conf.
Excellent. Cool. All right. Now fast forward to now. Splunk Conf is going on. And it's funny, we put on a bunch of virtual events, so we see this ourselves. By going virtual, you sort of open the borders up, right? There are no borders or no barriers to people having to attend a conference. They don't have to get on a plane, they don't have to buy a hotel room. right? They don't even necessarily have to miss work, especially if they're working from home. So this is the biggest Splunk conf ever, or it will be the biggest Splunk conf ever in terms of attendees and so forth, and that's great, right? You really get to truly a worldwide audience. Several important announcements around the Splunk observability platform coming out. If you don't mind, let's, obviously don't say anything we're not supposed to talk about yet, but give us a preview. What can we expect?
Yeah, the most exciting news for us that we're launching here at Conf is the Splunk Observability Suite. So as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, we had a fantastic set of products in the infrastructure monitoring and APM space that had focused on particular parts of the problem, namely, being able to collect metric data, distributed traces, so you could understand transaction flows across a complex application landscape. And we had some event support, but we didn't have logging completely integrated into the solution. And so a big part of the Splunk Observability Suite is the announcement that we have a new product, Splunk Log Observer, which is getting integrated into our infrastructure monitoring and APM products, all in a new look and feel that is a consistent Splunk look and feel. So we made significant enhancements to the usability and workflows around all of these different quote unquote pillars of monitoring data. And so from a customer point of view, the value is you now have a much more seamless experience. If you get an alert and you come into the Splunk Observability Suite, you can immediately kind of see the entire environment. You can understand the performance of individual components. You can understand the performance of transactions as they flow through different components. Our analytics capabilities help you identify where across a complex landscape you have the likely culprit that you need to investigate. And then once you go to an individual component, you can very quickly access all of the logs and do whatever ad hoc queries you want to. And it's all in a very, very seamless user experience. So this has kind of been, in many ways, the culmination of the past year of integration work that we've been doing since we've become a part of Splunk. And so we're very excited about that announcement. The other announcement around the observability suite, the first is the introduction of this new product, Log Observer. The second is we're announcing the beta of a real user monitoring product. And so historically, our monitoring products had been more focused on the back end. So once a request hits an API and a back-end service, we provide comprehensive observability and visibility into everything that happens in the data center. But as you can imagine, today's digital applications, people care about what's happening at the last mile, right? What's the real user's experience when they're accessing a mobile app or they're accessing a website through a web browser. And so with this real user monitoring product, we'll be able to give our customers visibility all the way down to the last mile. So we're very excited about these two significant enhancements to our monitoring and observability portfolio, and very excited to launch that here at Conf.
Very cool. So, look, observability is all the rage, right?
Yeah.
On TechStrong TV, I probably do 3, sometimes more interviews a week. Various vendors, players around observability. And it's funny. It's not like APM was a dead or dying market, right? Or then AI ops and everything else. But certainly observability has seemed to capture the mind of the market in terms of, yes, this is what we need. This is the thing we've been looking for, right? And I guess my question, Karthik, is, can it live up to the hype that we're hearing around it? It's not the be all and it's observability. It's not. Let's not make it bigger than it is. And as a result, are people going to be sort of disappointed with functionality and so forth, that what the real return is, if you will, on these observability tools?
I think it's a fair question every time a new term comes into our industry, people questioning its validity. I think observability means a lot of things to different people right now because we're still young in what exactly it is. I think if you boil it down to first principles, I think there's a very real need for a different class of solutions. I think there are very real solutions that exist today that will only get better in the coming years. And to me, it all boils down to this. Today's applications are living, breathing organisms, unlike yesterday's applications. Yesterday's applications were more static. They were more back office related, back end. Now, digital businesses are, digital apps are your business, and people are changing them every day, and they're far more distributed, they're far more complex because it allows everyone to move a lot more quickly. And so that's a big change. The other change is that, the value of what used to be monitoring has really shifted from data collection, because now practically every new application that's built today is built on an open source stack. And it's being built by the folks who are going to operate those applications, right? Either as a SaaS app or a web service. And in that world, people prefer an open source runtime stack. And that is inclusive not just of the middleware, but the data collection and the monitoring instrumentation. And so what you're finding is a massive amount of momentum behind open standards for monitoring instrumentation. Open telemetry is one of the largest projects in the CNCF, and it's all about standardizing the way you collect metrics and traces and log data around any class of application or infrastructure. So the big changes really are, we've made it very easy, and the industry is making it easier and easier to collect data. There's massively greater volumes of data than ever before. And that has basically shifted the problem from instrumentation to analytics. And that kind of is the essence of what observability is trying to capture, that like now you just have, you have living, breathing applications where they're changing all the time. You can't always predict and know what to watch for. So you just need to be prepared for any failure condition that comes up. You've got massive volumes of data. And so the problem really is, how do you collect all of this data cost effectively? How do you process it in real time so that you can identify patterns as they emerge? And how do you really bring the right level of analytics and AI and ML so that a human doesn't have to sort through all this data because they just can't? And that to me is the essence of observability. And I think we have a really great solution. I think there are lots of different approaches that people are evangelizing, but I think it's a real problem, and I think there are real solutions out there. And anyone who wants to be excellent at cloud native delivery models has to get this right. Otherwise, you're releasing software every day, and if something goes wrong, then your entire user community is upset, and you've just negated all the benefits of releasing software every day, right? And companies have figured this out. You look at the Facebooks, the Googles, the Netflixes, the Amazons of the world, they're doing this. And so, everyone else should be able to do it as well, with the help of people like Splunk.
Yeah. I mean, Carther, one of the best explanations and justifications for observability I've heard. Excellent. Thank you on that. But you're right that, we've moved from collecting data and then being able to look at that collected data to really observing and analyzing and doing something about it, right? Using that data rather than just collecting it. And it's an important distinction. And I think what's sort of a double helix going on is, at the same time, we're also collecting more data than we ever did before, as you said. And so, that it kind of feeds itself like that. You mentioned a bunch of open source CNCF, open telemetry, there's Prometheus, there's a bunch of great open source tools that are, helping people to collect data and helping them with observability. Now Splunk is a company that has open source roots, has always been a friend of the open source community. How's Splunk playing within the CNCF sort of world?
Well, Splunk, we have been making significant investments in the open source world. I wouldn't say that we've always been kind of at the same level of investment that we have been in recent years. But when you take OpenTelemetry, for example, we are co-founders of the OpenTelemetry project. One of the companies that we acquired, a company called Omnition, was actually there at the very beginning and co-sponsored and co-founded OpenTelemetry. And if you look at the contributions to OpenTelemetry, Splunk is the #1 contributor to OpenTelemetry. There is a tremendous amount of momentum behind the project, and so cloud vendors, commercial vendors, the OSS community, all contributing to OpenTelemetry. So we're very proud of the fact that we've contributed our agents and our instrumentation libraries to OTel. We'll continue to accelerate our investments there, and we've seen the rest of the industry follow suit as well. So I think it's a great trend.
Excellent. So Karthik, talk to SplunkConf is on. What kind of sessions can people, what should they look for around the observability news and goings on, and maybe some learnings and some sessions that they can key in on?
Yeah, absolutely. So in observability, we have a super session where we're actually going to announce all of these new products, and we have a demo so you can actually see everything in action. We also have a number of more detailed follow-up sessions on some of the specific product announcements. So for example, around real user monitoring and log observer and so on. So there's opportunity to get double clicks on all of that. We have some customer sessions as well, talking about not just the technology, but the people process approaches to doing observability well. So a number of great sessions that we have a whole track around DevOps at SplunkConf this year. So encourage people to look at those.
Excellent. Are you actually presenting on any of it, or?
I am at the super session for the DevOps super session. I am.
Very cool. We'll have to check that out. I will be there. Well, we'll be there virtually, of course, right? We're not there. I was going to say we'll be there, but yeah, we'll be there, but from here. But we'll be observing. Let's put it that way. We will be observing SplunkConf and trying to report on it. What else, Karthik? Anything else exciting around what's happening?
Well, I think it's an exciting conference for Splunk. We've made a lot of investments in being a broad data to everything platform. So we talk a lot about observability, but we've got some exciting announcements just in core platform around IT and security. So it should be a really awesome conference for folks.
All right, let me use my little prop here. So I was lucky. I'm covering. All of us at Media Ops are covering SplunkConf, and I got my little package today. And it came with this book, The Data Age is Here, and it's a great report on some significant surveys and research that Splunk has gone. And we'll be we'll have some articles, and we'll be discussing this in the days ahead. So many thanks to Splunk for that. If you're watching this, there's still time. Go register for Splunk.conf. Or it's actually splunkconf.com, isn't it? And you go see Karthik. And there's a lot more to Splunk, of course, more than just observability. Our friends Andy Mann, Chris Riley, all good people you don't want to miss at SplunkConf. Karthik, my friend, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Alan. It's great to be here.
All right, good luck. Good luck with the observability platform. I do hope for next year's SplunkConf we can actually sit down in person and do this interview.
I hope so too.
All right, my friend, be well. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest.
CISO Talk. To hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, guys, welcome back to TechStrong TV. Next up on our lineup, Alan has a conversation with Mohan Kampela of Big Panda and Ilan Rabinovich of Datadog, and they're going to be talking about their strategic partnership for out-of-the-box integrations. Great conversation and worth a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, this is Alan Schimmel, and thanks for joining us on another segment here for TechStrong TV. In this segment, we are actually going to be talking about a partnership that was recently announced between two companies in the cybersecurity and observability monitoring space. Neither company is, I think, new to our audience, but we'll give them a chance to tell a little bit about their company and a little bit about this partnership. Let me introduce you to our two guests. First of all, I have Mohan Kampela. Mohan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Ilan, good to see you. Happy to be on this call with you guys. Yeah, my name is Mohan Kampela. I am the VP of Product Marketing here at Big Panda. Big Panda, as I think many of you know, is an event correlation and automation platform that is in the business of helping enterprises prevent and resolve outages. That's a topic that's near and dear to my heart as well, because at this point, I've spent close to 20 years in the IT ops space, helping some of the largest companies in the world prevent and resolve outages. So happy to be here, Alan.
Thank you, Mohan. We're happy to have you here. And then joining Mohan and I is Ilan Rabinovich from Datadog. So Datadog's one of the original DevOps companies that we started following Ilan when I first launched DevOps.com almost over 7.5 years ago now. And I've been writing about Big Panda for longer than that in network world and all over the place. So I'm happy to have both companies on. Ilan, maybe some people are not familiar with Big Panda, with Datadog. Why don't you give them a little background and a little bit of your background?
Sure. Always good to chat, Alan and Mohan. Thanks for having me on. My name is Ilan Rabinovich, VP Product and Community here at Datadog. Alan and I have worked together for many years in the DevOps space and the DevOps community on events and activities outside of Datadog. But here today, we wanted to talk a little bit about Datadog and how we're helping our customers understand the health, availability, performance, and security of their applications and services. We all know that in the world of DevOps, one of the most important things is to measure what you're doing, so you can know if you're getting better, if you're being more successful. And that's where a platform like Datadog comes into play, helping you understand all of the pieces of your business and helping all your teams communicate and speak the same language as they talk about that health and availability. So,
absolutely. Ilan, listening to you, I'm reminded one of the first lessons. So I've started 4 or 5 venture-backed companies, and I was lucky to have my friend Brad Feld, who's Foundry and Techstars, and he was SoftBank before that, and Mobius. And one of the things he always hammered into our heads was everything could be measured, and we measure everything. And in DevOps, it's especially true, right? If you can't measure it, you can't really quantify, right? And if you can't quantify, you can't see if you're improving, not improving, or what you have. So it's real true. So a recent announcement between Big Panda and Datadog. Who wants to do the honors of telling us what this announcement and partnership's about? One of you have to.
Take it away, Mohan.
All right, great. So as you imagine, Alan and Ilan, I'm guessing you'll echo this. We're super excited about the partnership and the news that just came out with this amazing integration that the Datadog product team and the Big Panda product teams have jointly built and launched. And there's a couple of reasons why we're especially excited about this. And obviously doesn't really need to be said, I think, but Datadog has been seeing some amazing adoption across the industry, across the world. And we ourselves saw very rapid adoption of Datadog within our own customer base, I think, which is really the genesis of this whole partnership, right? And what led us to saying, wow, this is something that customers are actively looking at adopting, and especially in our customer base, we see a lot of that happening. So let's now talk to the Datadog team and see how we can really enhance the value, the proverbial get to the 1 + 1 = 3 type scenario. So that's one. And the other one, I think, is, of course, again, needless to say, these days, SaaS companies are seeing a lot of adoption and rapid adoption as well. And both Datadog and Big Panda, right, obviously both fall into that. We're both SaaS native companies. And as companies are embracing SaaS, embracing Datadog and embracing Big Panda, we thought it was just the right time for us to build on this partnership and build this new integration. And the other thing I'll say is, before I stop monopolizing the platform here, is I just say that a little shout out for the Datadog team, right? Even though, I mean, they're a large publicly traded company, multi-billion-dollar valuation, all of that, we're still very impressed with the sense of urgency that they have and the startup-like mindset that they have preserved, which really made it a pleasure for our teams to work with Ilan and his team.
It was a fun project to work on with with Alec and the rest of your team there at Big Panda. I think it's always fun to work with like-minded agile organizations that are that are able to move quickly. So that was great. I think one of the pieces that I was really excited about here was the way in which Big Panda was able to start ingesting a lot of the service dependency and service interaction data from Datadog to really help bring to help so that when you get alerted when something does come from Datadog into Big Panda or from other systems into Big Panda, being able to tie back how all of these systems interact, what other downstream systems might be affected, who you should bring in, having that rich data and having it come in directly from Datadog's APM offering. I think is going to be an exciting way to improve the on-call lives for a number of folks out there. So,
absolutely. I think back to the first time I was ever given a demo of Datadog, and as I said, this had to be 7.5 years ago. It might have been the Datadog CEO. It was pretty early on in the Datadog kind of life cycle, right? I want to say it might have been Aaron, though. He was the first marketing. Whatever. It was first time I saw Datadog. And what really struck me about Datadog was it was so easy to add whatever infrastructure you were looking to monitor, right? That you wanted to see what was happening. You wanted to add, a physical server. You wanted to add an instance at AWS. You wanted to add something. It was just so easy to add, and so that interface was highly intuitive and just, it was almost magnetic, if you will, in that everything, it attracted stuff. And I always thought to myself, the problem was I can add everything here. Then what, if you can add everything, you're really adding nothing, because what do you focus on? And so the issue then becomes is when you can add everything, how do you allow people to focus on what's really important? But at the time, the idea of being able to add a Big Panda feed, if you will, right, or a Big Panda threat or type of, so that's a little different than adding a server or an instance, right? And the the metrics of how much bandwidth or how much CPU or how much storage or memory you're using, right? And monitoring a security feed such as like what Big Panda's showing, and then being able to make that actionable, right? How do you bring that to people's attention, correlating it with all of these sources of information? And that's really, when we look at the job of SREs today, when we look at the job of DevOps today, it's not a question of information sources. It's a question almost of information overload. How do we prioritize? How do we correlate? How do we make it actionable? And so my question to both of you is, how are you bringing in this Big Panda stream, right? And correlating that with all of the other great things that Datadog can bring in, and not overloading the user, the human, automating what needs to be automated, and giving people what they need when they need it.
Yeah, I think so. What we're doing is actually a little more the other way around, which is Datadog is very one of the great things about Datadog is you can get up and running with it in minutes. We connect with everything in your environment, from business systems to containers to cloud providers to everything in between. And so regardless of what your tech stack looks like, Datadog is able to very quickly monitor it and help you assess the health of it, the performance of it, the security of it. At some point, though, things go wrong. Something goes bump in the night at 3 a.m. You get that dreaded 3 a.m. page, or your NOC gets called in, and that's where and alerts will fire. And that's where what Big Panda is helping us do here is to help correlate all of those alerts, help to bring that all into a central spot that that reduces the noise for your NOC teams and for your SRE and your response teams in a way that that lets you tie across these. Because when we're working in these distributed organizations with thousands of microservices or hundreds of microservices, I think some of the startups we talk to, I think they have more microservices than they have engineers at the company, right? Mm-hmm. How do they all fit together? Like when something breaks, who do I have to call downstream? How do I coordinate the response amongst all of those folks? And so I think that's what we're looking to do here, is make that a much a much less labor-intensive experience to take advantage of the ML and capabilities within something like within Big Panda to help reduce that noise.
So
yeah, I'll just build on that a little bit, Alan, if I can.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think like you said and like Ilan was saying, if you look at modern organizations, the one thing that they deal with and unfortunately are overwhelmed with on a daily basis is just too much noise, right? And when there's too much noise and everything looks like it's valuable, I mean, how do you expect these very highly skilled but always short of time DevOps engineers and SRE teams to focus on the right data, that one little needle in the haystack, if you will, that's actually pointing to a real problem, a health, availability, performance problem with an application or service. And that's where I think the integration really adds a lot of value across 3 dimensions, I would say. And I'll try to be brief on this. So one, we have all the amazing, rich alert data, the streaming data sets being generated by Datadog. And companies have other tools. Sometimes, let's say, they might have don't be shocked, but they might have a mainframe solution, for example, a monitoring tool that might be generating some data. They might have some other legacy systems that also might be generating data. And like Ilan was saying, thousands of microservices-based applications generating a ridiculous amount of data. So how do we take all of these rich streaming data sets, correlate them in real time using machine learning, and then sift through all of that and find you that one nugget or insight that the DevOps team can then use to go fix an outage? I think that's where it's a really synergistic relationship where Big Panda is ingesting Datadog alert data to get to those insights.
Got it.
Yeah, that's one. And then 2 other things very quickly. So one is, like Ren was saying, with a lot of these microservices-based applications, the topologies change all the time, right? Constantly in response to user interactions, the load, maybe a retailer had a flash sale, and suddenly you have 10 million people trying to buy something, and the e-commerce site is now spinning up thousands of containers or microservices to meet that load, and the application topology starts to change. So now when there's a problem, how do you quickly then determine in this complex topology, where do you have that one problem? So we're combating that and mitigating that by ingesting the rich topology data that Datadog's generating and using that for correlation. The third one is, as these applications change, and again, I mean, you guys know this, obviously you live in the world of DevOps, but today every big company that's adopting DevOps sees thousands of changes on a daily, weekly basis across their application infrastructure. And we also know that a lot of times when there's a problem, when something breaks, people say, what changed, right? It's not what failed, but they say what changed. So we're also, as part of the integration, ingesting the changes from all the sources that companies have. We're using that for correlation, and then we're actually feeding that back to Datadog. So Datadog's DevOps users have those likely problem changes or root cause changes at their fingertips. So that becomes yet another way for them to very, very quickly hone in on a problem. So it's a 3-part integration. It's a very rich, detailed one. So that's the summary of this very long monologue. Back to you.
All right. So, guys, is this integration, it's available now? Yeah?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
And, I know you both offer different versions of your product sets. They're SaaS-based. Is there any particular tier or something? Is there a level or something where this is, how is it offered? Is it an add-on that someone pays for? Is it come along with the regular product? Does it come along at some tier level? Or, how is this done?
So This is something that Datadog and Big Panda customers can adopt today, regardless of what plan or tier they're on.
So it's available to all
Available to all Datadog and Big Panda customers.
Excellent. And I mean, look, from a security point of view, right? And Mohan, you've been in security 20 years, you know this, right? We went through the SIM wars in like the mid 2005, 7, 2003, where the idea was, we were going to set up these SIMs that would just take all of the relevant security data and try to get actionable intelligence out of it. And it kind of, the fact is they were log managers, right? And log algorithm, log analysis tools. Where the SIMs failed, the Datadogs of the world have succeeded, and not just with security. They've actually done a much better job of being able to gather information on so many different assets and feeds in today's organization's infrastructure. You both mentioned the like ML type of capability to kind of reduce the signal to noise ratio and hone in on what people are important, what people need to hone in on what's important. Can we talk a little from both of you about, it's easy to just say ML and ML some black box in the corner that we don't really need to know. But what about, how is machine learning helping here? How is it, how is it being utilized by both of you in this to make people more secure, to make, give people better information?
Sure. Alan, you want me to go first?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know, Alan, we didn't talk before, but it's very interesting that you use the phrase black box, right? So from a Big Panda standpoint, I think we realized that machine learning or AI, more broadly, obviously is very key to processing these massive real-time streaming data sets that exist today. And that's the only way in which organizations can cope with this avalanche or tsunami of data, right? So that's kind of like the foundation part of it. Now, in terms of the phrase black box, though, it's interesting because like at Big Panda, we've taken a very thoughtful and deliberate approach towards that. In fact, our implementation of machine learning, we actually call it open box machine learning. And what we mean is we don't want our machine learning to, like you said, be this black box that's opaque and where users and humans don't really understand how it works, can't really control or impact or influence it. And there's no way for them to, or I wouldn't say no way, but it's going to be hard for them to trust the results generated by this black box in the corner. So with Big Pandas and machine learning across the product, we've actually tried to make it very transparent so users can see how the machine learning algorithms work. It's easy for them to then incorporate their tribal knowledge or expert domain knowledge, if you will, and they can actually then test some of these changes before deploying them to production. So for us, what we see is this very deliberate approach towards transparency, testability, and control really fosters adoption and ultimately, I think, drives a lot of value quickly for those users.
Fair enough. Alon, how about you?
So on the Datadog side, I think our approach is we have features like the Datadog Watchdog offering, which we look at that. Our platform looks at all of that data as it comes in, whether it's from metrics, traces, or other data types, and uses that to identify issues that customers might not even realize have existed in their environment. So by looking at all of those signals and trying to identify patterns on how those systems should behave, how they're behaving now, and alerting folks. And so those types of capabilities our focus is on helping you find the issue and find the root cause of those issues. And then what we do is we'll notify out to Big Panda. Big Panda, however, is looking across not just Datadog, but across all of the other tooling that you might be using in your organization. And their ML piece helps to correlate all of those different signals together into a single message for that responder and for those response teams. And so I think these two capabilities together means that you'll detect and diagnose, you'll detect issues more quickly, assemble your teams more quickly, communicate better across your organization as to what the response plan looks like, and hopefully get that mean time to recovery down, mean time to detection and mean time to recovery down across the board.
Right. And that is, I mean, ultimately that's where we want to be.
Yep.
All right. Guys, we're about out of time. We mentioned that it's available now on your respective websites. Where can people get more information on this?
We'll share some links for the notes here, but I think there's blog posts on both our sides and available directly in the Datadog app.
We have. I think we probably got in the blog post. We'll try to put the links in the notes for Digital Anarchist. For those people watching on TechStrong TV and our stream, if you go to the website, it'll be on there too. The problem is, guys, it's not a problem, but our stream from TechStrong goes on Facebook Live and LinkedIn Live and YouTube Live, and it's on Apple TV and Roku and Amazon Fire and mobile apps. So a lot of people consume this in different places at different times. And so having a central place where we can send them to a link sometimes. But it'll be up on Digital Anarchist and TechStrong.tv. Anyway, Mohan, Elan, thanks both for joining us. Congratulations. As someone who has been trying to make DevSecOps a reality for 8 years now. It does my heart good to see DevOps companies working with cyber companies, making us all better off as a result, have more visibility, more secure, getting a handle on, all of this information that's out there that can be used. So congratulations to both of your companies for working together on this. Good stuff.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. Good seeing you both. Hey, this is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We're going to be right back with our next guest.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Hey, welcome back to TechStrong TV. Next up, we have the next installment of Gary Berman and his Cyber Hero Adventures show, talking with Paul Lee, who's the CISO of Upheld, and they're going to be talking about cryptocurrency. Really fascinating conversation, so please give it a look.
Hello, and welcome to the Cyber Hero Adventures Defenders of the Digital Universe show. Today's show focuses on answering the question, what is fact versus fiction regarding cryptocurrency? Stay tuned to find out more. I'm your host, Gary Berman. Our mission is to shine the light on the people and organizations who keep us safe online while at work, home, and school, and to serve as a business-to-business networking platform for the cybersecurity and information technology community. We've learned that 55% of human communication is nonverbal. That's why we include a video feed, so that you have the option of seeing our guests or simply to just listen. You never know who you're going to connect with and how you'll be able to maximize opportunities resulting from hearing from our guests. As the victim of a series of cyber attacks, I've learned that the only time that you hear about hacking or cybersecurity is when the criminals win. Well, not anymore. Let's begin by saying thank you to today's special solo guest. Paul Lee is the CISO for Uphold, a currency trading platform. He hails from Liverpool in the north of England and went to university in Leeds. Now, what I'm about to say comes directly from Paul. This is not me. And I quote, he enjoys pina coladas and getting caught in the rain, as well as solving problems and making his users safer, whether they happen to like it or not. Hey, Paul, welcome to the show.
Hello, Gary. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the disclaimer. It's appreciated.
It's the first time I've ever needed a disclaimer, but it's pretty funny, and I give you credit for that.
Thanks very much.
So, Paul, our audience is about to listen and learn about, what you do. But I would like to begin by asking you why you do it. What is your mission? Tell us your origin story.
Okay. So I think potentially your users will know a book called The Cider House Rules. There's the protagonist is a guy called Homer Wells, and he's defined in the book by needing to be useful. So I've felt that need since I was pre-uni. I got into IT because of it, because that looked like it was going to be the next big enabler. The machine, and it's showing my age now, the machine and information age. IT was just the way to get stuff done. And then I went from that. I was an IT manager, then I managed other IT managers. Telecommunications, I went through there's a big telecoms provider in the UK called Energous. I used to manage systems there. Then I realized that security was the new frontier. A lot of what I did and a lot of what of the nebulous stuff, let's call it the interchange between the people and the machines, it was security. That was the edge, and that was where it was most interesting to be ultimately. And so I could be useful and have an interesting life by going into security. And so I did that through kind of the finance angle. Private equity firms were just kind of the wild, wild west, and they used to buy software to manage their portfolios. And so I basically got in on a company that provided portfolio software. And I used to do the IT and then the security for those guys. So I've dealt with regulators, banks, some governments, sovereign wealth funds, all that kind of good stuff. And then, I loved all that. And then I got the opportunity again to do the, cybersecurity with an IT background in crypto, which is another new frontier. So you've got a new frontier protecting a new frontier. It was an irresistible call for me to work at Uphold. So, yeah.
I mean, that's a great origin story. And it brings to mind, there was a famous kind of quote from a gentleman, I think in the 1960s or so, when someone asked, he was a bank robber, a prolific bank robber. And someone asked him, why do you rob banks? And he famously replied, "That's where the money is."
Brilliant.
Is that, and now the money is all virtual and digital. Tell us about that.
Well,
I mean,
exactly.
Just tell us about what is cryptocurrency.
Okay, so cryptocurrency is a digital only representation of value. It is not a commodity, but it can be treated as one. So it's not a direct, you're not buying an orange. You're not buying a face mask in COVID times. You're buying the value that is derived from the knowledge that this unique digital asset, is unique, which isn't true when you're talking about the US dollar, the pound, the euro. It can be spent multiple times and it can be owned really by different people, and that's where inflation comes from. Whereas digital currencies initially, Satoshi's dream was to ensure that people knew that Bitcoin or portion of a Bitcoin that they were buying, selling, was known to be owned by one party and then sold to another. And so that ownership piece was really important, because it meant that the power was put back into the end user, the ultimate owner of that, and there were no brokers. His dream was that the big banks would be not put out of business, but kind of sidelined because in this model.
Indeed. And for our audience who may not be familiar with the origin story of Satoshi, and this is an interesting fact versus fiction kind of thing, because there's this entire mythology, built around this man. I have learned.
We assume he's a man.
Well, that's the question. So what's the story?
So back in, I believe it was 2003, I could be wrong. Someone created an algorithm and started talking about it on forums. And the algorithm was public Some algorithms they derive their security through the fact that you don't really see the algorithm, but this algorithm was put forward. It was essentially a way of creating a unit of value, a thing. It's ultimately a hash on a chain. This hash is created through work. The work being a computer calculating two hash values together. It's essentially, it's called work because it costs time and energy and computing power. And so those things have real value in the real world. And so therefore, if people are spending them, the derived product, which is our Bitcoin, has value based on that, because you can't just print them. And they use hashing functions, which is a mathematical function, which is one way. It's a one-way hashing function. In order to derive the end value without using the hashing function or going through the work, you're talking billions and billions and billions to one, the possibility that you would accidentally create a Bitcoin that would function correctly. But even if you were able to do that, you wouldn't be able to write it to the blockchain, which is ultimately the value of Satoshi's blueprint for a currency. Because what happens is we can trace all of the currencies and all of the related transactions between, not the currencies, sorry, Bitcoins, all of those related transactions all the way back to when the first Bitcoin was minted, where someone solved the puzzle, the hash comparison, the mathematical function, and then created the first Bitcoin. We can see, who owned it. It's a Bitcoin address, so it looks a bit weird to humans, but it's ultimately a long number, and that is the address of a wallet. And a wallet ultimately will belong to a person or an entity. And so then you can spend it, or you can keep it. In the industry, they call it hodling. You can hold it, but it's called hodling. So there are people who hodl and there are people who trade. So the idea is that transaction is validated by other people doing transactions on the blockchain, and so you all get a version of the blockchain. It's a kind of voting consensus algorithm. So if one person is trying to erroneously spend someone else's Bitcoin or mint a Bitcoin outside the confines of the security paradigm of the currency, it will be spotted because it won't look correct and the hash will be wrong, and other people validate that. Now, we can talk about the types of attacks that can be possible on a blockchain that don't have so many people involved. But the more people involved, the more transactions involved, I should say, because a lot of them are machines, not all people transacting. It's a lot of automation as well. The more individual transactors on the network, the more trustable it is from a certain perspective. Because if you imagine, I'm sorry if I'm going off on one, but
no, not at all. I'm really happy that you're doing this, because it really is like layers of an onion, and
it is. No, it totally is.
And the more you kind of look into it, the more there is. I remember when I was first on my kind of Forrest Gump improbable journey into cybersecurity, I went to a cryptocurrency conference.
Which one was it?
It was in Miami, where I live, a couple of years ago, and there were some things that really just jumped out. Number one is I had this is a fact versus fiction kind of thing. This view that cryptocurrency equals Bitcoin, that there was only one type of currency. I've subsequently learned about Monero, and there were 100 booths there with this entire ecosystem, around the notion of cryptocurrency. And I had the privilege of listening and learning from some people from the Bitcoin Foundation and things like that. Can you take our audience, peel away some of these onions about ecosystem?
Okay. To keep it fairly high level, we are a trading platform. And so we allow people to trade in multiple currencies, fiat currencies like dollar and pound, and then cryptocurrencies. And then there are things called stable coins. And then there are also digital commodities. Now, there's different names for these things, but ultimately, you are paying for or buying the underlying value. So people are trying to sell different underlying values. So we trade, and lots of other platforms trade now in AU coins. So it's essentially gold. So somewhere in the world, gold is owned by the people who mint the coins, the digital coins, and you are essentially buying into the fact that you will own this underlying asset, this commodity. So it's like a traditional commodity, but it's digitized. And so you don't have to go through a traditional broker. You are essentially trusting the person who's issuing the currency. So there is that. There is what people call digital gold, which is Bitcoin. A lot of people refer to Bitcoin as digital gold. Yeah, it's the progenitor of a lot of the thinking around cryptocurrency. And we've talked about Satoshi. We can go into loads of detail about the tech of it, but ultimately it's the immutable blockchain that's public. That's the thing. There's no obfuscation. There is no prevarication about, I'll pay you on Tuesday, I'll do this, blah blah blah. If you go into a transaction, it's there and then, and it's validated. That the reason it takes time on the blockchain is because it's validated by your peers.
Well, let me ask you about that. Forgive the interruption, but you're saying so many important things. So the question of time for transaction. If someone were to buy something using a credit card, it's microseconds. If someone tell our audience about that. What is the latency?
So the I think at one point it was about 12 minutes. That's the one that pops into my mind, but it's waxed and waned over the years. I think the crypto guys will slap me for getting this wrong, but I think 12 minutes was what sticks in my mind. So for a Bitcoin transaction, you get preliminary validation, but then people will validate your transaction is real, and then you'll get the full actual validation where the full quorum of required users or validations comes in. And so when you're performing a transaction using Bitcoin, the receiver of that transaction has to decide how long they want to wait to validate the transaction. A lot of them will essentially receive the transaction, this is online, and they'll say, so we're not talking in-person transactions here, which is also possible because there's a lot of crypto debit cards now. The receiver, the merchant, will receive the transaction and they'll essentially validate the order and say, brilliant, we've got your payment, we'll deliver on blah, 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 and they'll act in good faith. Now, something that's a little bit different than with credit cards, because the risk is taken on by the credit card provider, ultimately from the merchant's perspective. And so if there is some kind of fraud going on, etc., it's between, it's either between the merchant and the card provider, or the card provider and the end user. Right. But with Bitcoin, there's no, it's meant to be a point-to-point transaction. So what happens is the merchant will essentially in good faith continue, but then you might get an email 12 minutes later and say, actually, something went wrong with this transaction. Please review blah, or we've noticed this, or something like that. So that's slightly different, but the actual buying and selling experience.
I understand. So, but just to build on that, let's delve now into the notion of cybersecurity and security of transactions. Because you're a CISO, and I know you are a subject matter expert on this. Going back to what I said earlier about the bank robber, saying, okay, that's where the money is. Do you think you're targeted more than traditional finance organizations by organized criminals?
Well, it's an interesting question. So organized criminals, so there is a base of knowledge around how to get round, circumvent, cheat traditional finance regulations. There's anti-money laundering regulations. There's ways of spotting that a company is being used as a shell. There's a lot of ways to stop it at the front door, and then there's other ways to detect it on the back end. We are a neonatal industry, compared to traditional finance, but. Right. It's actually harder to perform most of the grifts that you can perform in a traditional bank on the blockchain. But the lack of in the past, the lack of tying the validation of an actual human to a Bitcoin address or a crypto address has been a problem. So we are currently as an industry catching up, because in every area that we have regulatory ability, so we're given the authority to trade by the regulator. Whoops. So sorry about that. We're given the ability to trade in that jurisdiction. We have to do a background checks and IDVs when we are actually allowing people to trade.
So is the industry itself self-regulated?
So in the past, it was predominantly because the regulators didn't know how to deal with it. But we are definitely subject to greater scrutiny. So that's kind of half the answer. So the organized criminals. So we are the subject of attacks. And I can go into like a couple of examples in a bit. But
yes, can you go in? I would love to hear some examples.
Okay, so we do see fraud. We actually see something called friendly fraud, which is an exploit of traditional banking, which is a pain. So ACH in the US, a user can spend money and then claim to their bank that it was spent erroneously. The bank will not ask the user any questions, and we as the merchant will lose that money. And so ultimately what we have to do is protect ourselves using really a lot of AI, behavioral analysis. There's various clawback methods. But it's interesting because we are dealing with a lot of nuanced attacks where people will be, this is a kind of a time when the true intelligence of these criminals comes out. So Donald Trump issued $1,200 checks to everyone, taxpayers. What happened was we found that there were a lot of transactions. There were a lot of deposits of exactly $1,200.
Right.
We looked into that phenomenon, and then we started getting support cases of people saying, someone called me, talked me through registering for your application, registering on your application, and then I transferred my money. They'd been promised that it was a federal program, and if they were to bank, all of their check in this federal program, they would essentially get, double their money. Insert it, random incentive here. And what happened was, because they were on the phone with these people, watching them do all the ID verification, adding a bank account, they then stole their credentials, moved the money instantly, and then moved it again. And so every reputable trading.
Why do you call it friendly? I mean, it doesn't seem very friendly to me.
Yeah, no. Well, the friendly fraud aspect is the ACH fraud I mentioned earlier, because you actually have real people who are not being defrauded. It is an odd name, friendly fraud. It's to differentiate it from other types of fraud, because there are lots of names for those things. But
I mean, this is incredibly interesting and complicated. So what do you consider the biggest? Yeah. What's the biggest challenge for you working in this industry?
Well, okay. You would expect that it's, dealing with the daily DOS attacks or DDoS attacks, dealing with people pretending to be legitimate customers and actually being money mules. You'd expect that it was something like that, but actually it's trying to find crypto engineers. So in answer to your question earlier, and people who know how to, for me, talk security with regards to crypto, because there's a dearth of knowledge about some subjects, but others there's hardly any. So the situation is that you need to have very specialized knowledge, and you need to know how to write the code for the currencies, which actually, referring back to your question, there are many, there's thousands. I think there was a last count of about 2,000 currencies that are kind of largely aware. Yeah, that I'm largely aware of.
So when you say currencies, like Bitcoin,
cryptocurrencies,
they're 2,000. Wow.
Yeah, well, I'm sure people will scream at me saying I'm wrong even now, but
I mean,
that's
why
what
you
I
think
saw.
there are more of
Yeah,
them,
well,
or?
you have these initial coin offerings all the time. You get
Yeah.
private backers who'll initially fund project, and then it'll go. And if a trading platform will take them on, we list, I think, 62 at the moment. But some of those. So go on.
No, I mean, my brain's just firing. You're saying so many things. So ICOs, initial coin offerings.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell our audience about that, and why are there such seemingly? Or let me say it this way: is it a valid assumption that there are very large swings in the value of these coins?
Yes, there are. So
why?
Yeah, okay, so it's related to news coverage. It's also related to pump and dump scams, and sometimes those two are related. So traditional schemes were, timeshares, other things. We have our own share of those, and so you have to go to a reputable source to figure out whether a currency is worth spending money on. But ultimately, no matter how well people are educated, if they think they have a chance of being in on something that will be massive, they're willing to throw a few dollars at it. And so a lot of the speculation and a lot of the loss is to do with that. So usually it's not people losing large amounts of money on an ICO. Usually, obviously that's, there's a caveat there. It's usually, transitory speculators who will put maybe $50, but you've got lots of them and they're hoping for the best. And what will happen is someone will put a limit order on the price of, and this is getting into the trading side of it now. We don't actually offer trading facilities at the moment at this level, but we are in working on it. But on some platforms, you can put a limit order on it. So you'll say, okay, if the price reaches this amount, sell. If it reaches this amount, buy. And what will happen is they'll start, they'll tell an influencer, crypto influencer, to say something. The crypto influencer may or may not know better, and they'll be part of this, and it'll kind of drive interest in the currency through the roof. Then you have bought low, and now you're going to sell high because you're expecting it. You expect it to happen. So you'll put a limit order on, in the next 24 hours or something. You'll make sure that this.
I mean, to me, it's very interesting because the fact that it's so secure is a double-edged sword, I think, possibly, because cyber criminals use. Let me say it this way. Is it valid that cyber criminals use cryptocurrency to exchange value for illicit services?
It is, but it's also true that people use shell companies and gold transferred for, certain artifacts, and it's in any financial system that will happen. But you're right. People will use cryptocurrencies to exchange value. There are tools that we use and everyone else uses and the FBI uses and Interpol uses pretty effectively. And I'll talk about the Twitter hack in a minute. But they will use these tools to figure out. I used to call it, when I did presentations, I would call it the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon of blockchain, because you have Bitcoin wallets. Blockchain wallets, and those wallets will have a transaction connected to another wallet, connected to another wallet, connected to another wallet. And through the interactions of those wallets, you can discern risk and you can discern intent a lot of times. Did people really mean to do this? Have we had repeated transactions? There are some, another phrase, tumblers. There are some services that will allow you to try and wash some currency using a tumbler. So it disaggregates the sender from the receiver, but they are more and more getting killed off. But you mentioned Monero, because for obvious reasons. Regulators don't want anything to do with them, and so they lose their license, and they're not able to trade, and then it becomes an illegal activity, and then they get arrested. But you mentioned Monero. Monero is a privacy coin, which means that there are functions inside the coin which make it easier to conceal your identity, and it uses certain functionality that's similar to tumbling. So but it's not generally used by commerce. There's a lot less users out there. Can I just quickly go back to the volatility you mentioned? So the volatility is more likely on a platform, on a coin that has less users and less invested value, because it's easier to create a swing. A classic one is Dogecoin. I have a bit of Doge myself, but it's just because it's a laugh and it's got a dog as its symbol, and my son likes dogs, likes the Doges. Shiba, I think the Shiba Inu.
So wait, before you go into that, are you suggesting that you are making your financial decisions based upon your liking of a dog?
Absolutely.
Because I'm not going to invest in you. Maybe I'll do your platform, but forget it.
No, absolutely no. So I've got a few Doge because I love this. My son loves these Shiba Inu dogs, and I'll ask you. Haven't you got a Zimbabwean dollar? It's great to have some of these currencies that are just random, and wow. 1 billion Zimbabwean dollars. But sometimes
what is that worth? Today's coin?
0.002 cents. I don't.
Wow! Listen. Crazy. I live in Florida. I have some great swampland. I'd love to sell you if you're interested. But
absolutely.
No, more on a serious, on a substantive, note here. Who are your biggest users, on your platform? How do you describe that?
Yeah, we've got a bit of a cross section. One of the founders and a few of the founders' principles was that people who were not served by traditional finance need a place to be able to transact.
You mean the unbanked or the underbanked?
I was about to say the unbanked and underbanked, yes. So those people, so classic example, I don't really want to draw attention to specific countries, but there are some countries where rapid inflation, distrust in the structures, the traditional structures, and the sheer non-value and no trust in the currency has forced people to choose different ways of trying to exchange value. And we see on our platform from certain jurisdictions, people essentially buying loaves of bread, just their weekly groceries, petrol or gasoline.
Wow.
So people are using
a debit card. Is that
no? What's happening is they're using their phones, and they're essentially using QR codes to transfer using any given cryptocurrency to each other, and so they can see, oh, I've just paid you. I've got my groceries, and so it's sidestepping that traditional finance role.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's those people. There's the aforementioned hodlers, people who basically grab it and hold on to it, and then occasionally they'll transact. They'll see a new currency will come out, and they'll say, "Oh, I'll just spend a little bit more on that." But ultimately, I might want my cold storage. So there's hot storage and cold storage. Hot storage is something like Uphold. You are connected to the internet, and you are able to trade easily, and you can do stuff. But you also are subject to the risk of someone hacking your account and doing stuff that you might want. And then you've got cold storage, which usually relies on physical controls. But I particularly like, there's a Ledger Nano, but there's Trezor out there as well. But you've got a Nano device.
It's a physical, like
it's a USB. Yeah, it's a little USB, and there's Bluetooth ones now. And you'll plug them in. You'll use an app to transfer, to basically give you a secure Bitcoin address. You will then go to wherever you buy your Bitcoin, and let's just say Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, but I'll say Bitcoin.
Okay.
I seem to be going.
It's how I began. I've always just called it that. But as you're talking about the user experience, how do you decide in your role as CISO between usability and security on the app?
Yeah, I know it's tough. It's tough because you're trying to make the app easy to use. You're trying to make it as interoperable with other apps because we have a partner program. And you're also trying to make sure that the people who use it the app are secure. And so there's on the website there's two sections to the security section. There's like us protecting you and you protecting you. And there's always a big debate about whether 2FA, two-factor, I just have to say this, two-factor is not an email address, everyone. Some people try and argue it is. It's a disaggregated step. And so if you've got email to reset your password, that's not a disaggregated step. That's part of your username and password combination. So your username and password, 2FA, you've got biometrics, you've got the usual slew. SMS is the most known, but has some variable flaws with it. And then you've got TOTP, which is your Google Authenticator app, which is a little bit of a pain. You need a separate app to use it. So ultimately, we have to decide what to do as a baseline, what we make all users do. Then we have to decide when we do that. Do we do it when people onboard onto the platform and we just get the pain over with? Or do we say, you know what, we're going to make it easy for you to get on the platform and we'll do it when you want to deposit funds? Or so when money's changing hands. Or do we wait until you want to move money? You can put your money on the platform, you can spend it inside our ecosystem, but then when you want to move money off, you have to authenticate yourself. Now, there's debates around usability versus security, fraud risk versus what's reasonable, what regulators require, the letter of the law versus the spirit of why it was written, etc. And so we have to change our focus, but depending on what our users need. Usually, what we want to do, especially now we're trying to support the underbanked. So we're not talking tons of money. You have lower thresholds, and you'll say, okay, just like voting, if you're under a certain threshold, we don't require that you go through a crazy IDV scheme, which is going to, require documents you may not have, or to have them put you in danger in a certain jurisdiction. But above that, it's reasonable as a provider to ask for various levels of verification, because we're dealing with larger amounts of money and the liability is greater. So a risk-based approach is the answer to your question.
Well, that's a great answer. And so as we're kind of coming to a close here, I could listen and learn from you for...
I know, and I've realized I've half started a lot of subjects.
No, this is, I would love to have you back on at some point down the road, and we can continue to unpack this incredibly interesting and important change in the whole world. So maybe you can share with our audience a little bit about who your customers are. Are you primarily B2C, so you target consumers, or do you have business-to-business transactions, or do you deal with the government, or all of the above?
Okay, so at the moment, we are what we like to call B2B2C, but we have a large B2C. We have basically direct relationships with our users, and we also are trying to ramp up the partner program that we have, because ultimately it drives business onto our platform. And what we're fundamentally is a wallet with rules and security, and we want to make sure as many people as possible can use that. And so I would say B2B2C is the way we're designed. But because of that, end users using our app, or the web app, or the mobile app, ultimately are our customers and could be businesses themselves. So we try and treat everyone similarly. Businesses go through a lot more verification checks, obviously, but end users, similarly so. So it is a mixture.
How do you dimensionalize, Uphold? How big are you? How would you explain that? With I guess the question beneath the question is to convey a sense of confidence, and
right.
And
so
credibility.
That's fair enough. So one of the things that conveys confidence in our platform, we were one of the first, I believe, the first crypto trading platform to provide a transparency page. It's been there since 2003. It's still there today. It shows that we are over 100% capitalized. So ultimately, we don't multi-spend or allow people to multi-spend. In order to transact on the platform, you've got to have the money there. If we were if something happened to our company, all the money is all there, and not other sites sometimes don't do that. So the capitalization is there, your money is essentially safe, and we've got I think the last time I checked, it's $120 million on the platform, and that's a mixture of traditional metals, aside from the digital metals that I talked about earlier, and then we've got the fiat currencies and all those cryptocurrencies I mentioned. We've been around for a long time. We, in the space, to say a long time, 2 years is an eternity in crypto. But we're known. We've got a good presence. We take as good as we get in the Twitter sphere in terms of when people say that we're doing something wrong, we take it on board. We've got a good Trustpilot score. I don't know if people aren't aware what Trustpilot is. It's an independent agency that allows users, anyone, to complain about an entity, and the entity then has a right to reply. I happen to know that our COO and president takes an active interest in these replies, and so we're there to make sure that people aren't upset and aren't causing a Twitter storm, because we make sure that we respond and we fix things that are broken. And a lot of times, fraudsters will take advantage of that, because they'll claim that something has happened to them in order to try and force us to overlook or maybe just kind of rush into rectifying them when they have actually, caused some problem for either other users or us as a platform. And so it's a tightrope. We invest heavily in the people on the anti-fraud side, and we've got a decent support team. So I don't know. I'd say that the Twitter Uphold Inc. @Uphold Inc. is our Twitter handle, and if you just tune into that handle, you'll see how people talk about us and to us.
Wow. Well, this has been so incredible. Let's do a series of shows. Maybe you can invite some of your colleagues, some of the thought leaders in your industry, to share their insights, to really help answer the question, cryptocurrency, fact or fiction. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to amplify your mission?
I just think that people need to try this out as an industry. There is a lot of there's a lot of problems associated in the press with it. Like I was going to mention the Twitter hack. We actually have seen that the FBI has found the people who hacked Twitter based on tracking where the money went when people fell for it. They made, how much did they make? I think it was only like $12,000. It was peanuts compared to what they could have made. But ultimately, they could tie back the entire hack, the hack was sophisticated. The method of extracting value from the hack was very unsophisticated, and so that bit them. And so the FBI and they've basically found who did it now, or they found suspects, shall we say? And so there is. There is an entire cottage industry that's grown around detecting fraud and detecting bad behavior. And I think it's actually going to be much better and cleaner than traditional finance, because traditional finance relies, if you want to subvert traditional finance, it relies on bribery, it relies on contacts. But where everything is tied to private keys, which are protected and more verifiable than your bank manager's background, I think it's a good way forward, and it's shaking up the entire industry. You can see it. Financial.
Wow, fantastic. Wow. Well, Paul, thank you so much. I have, since you mentioned your dog, reference and how motivating it was, and that I'm in the comic creation and animation business, amongst other things. So who's your favorite superhero and why?
All right. Okay, it has to be Thor, because he's got a bloody big hammer. There you go.
Indeed. Well, on that note, for more information, we'll include Paul's contact information in the show notes. And Paul, thanks so much for this incredible show. If you would like to be a guest on our show, just send an email to Gary@cyberheroescomics.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I'm here now with the Tuesday headlines. First up on DevOps.com, we have an article that looks at automation in the code securing process. Beyond static application security testing and even DevOps, for developers, the idea of shifting security even further left in the software development lifecycle is one that everybody can agree with. This article posits that the only way to get security as far over to the left as possible to reap maximum rewards is through automation. Making sure developers have as little cognitive overhead as possible will allow them to build code faster and more securely, according to the article. The ultimate goal is faster feedback cycles that accelerate development cycles. We also have an article on DevOps.com from a gentleman by the name of Nick Clayton, who is with the Dfinity Foundation. He's talking about how his organization, which is working to extend the public internet so it can natively host websites, software systems, open internet services, and more, how his organization has been able to bootstrap the project through a laser focus on operational responsibility and a set deadline for releasing its developer network, even during the global pandemic. DevOps has played a major role in their efforts, which so far have been successful. It's an interesting read and an article definitely worth checking out. Okay, we also have news that ServiceNow and IBM are working together to integrate the Watson Artificial Intelligence for IT Operations platform with the IT Service Management platform from ServiceNow. This move is designed to improve productivity among IT teams, who will also be able to proactively identify anomalies in IT environments 60% faster. AIOps is growing in popularity as IT environments grow increasingly complex, as the number of potential issues that can adversely impact end-user experience are moving beyond the capabilities of an IT team's ability to track manually. Over on Container Journal, we have an article that takes a look at the various Kubernetes deployments and the complexities of their infrastructure, especially single-node clusters. The proliferation of single-node clusters creates three primary infrastructure management challenges: security, heterogeneous architectures, and limited connectivity. This article parses out each of those challenges and discusses the need for a Kubernetes API that can point and connect to wherever the cloud is for an edge device. That will help simplify and expand the use of Kubernetes beyond its current footprint. In the news on Container Journal, Fairwinds has updated its open source Goldilocks tool for optimizing CPU and memory resources on a Kubernetes cluster to provide support for large clusters with numerous namespaces. It also has made it possible to view resource recommendations from a single namespace and provides a simplified process for installing the control plane vertical pod, autoscaler VPA, for Kubernetes clusters. The company says the improvements address the requirements of large clusters at a time when many IT teams are starting to centralize the management of Kubernetes clusters to reduce costs. Over on Security Boulevard, we have the latest from Richie Jennings on Intel's recent moves that upset its user base by disclosing a major Bluetooth vulnerability before a fix had been created. Along with an image of a really disgusting fungus of the same name as the vulnerability, Bleeding Tooth, the article discusses how the vulnerability was found by a Google researcher, Intel's reaction, which was not good, and the public's response, which is all over the place, all in true Richie Jennings fashion. And we have a look at how the pandemic has affected security analysts, and it's no secret their lives have been as disrupted as everyone else's. This article looks at recent research, though, that shows morale among security staff is at an all-time low. Half of first-time analysts plan to leave after just 3 months on the job, according to the study, and not one of them plans to stay in their current role for longer than 18 months. What's more, across the board, nearly half of security analysts are considering leaving their role before 12 months is out. Across all pay grades, the average amount of time spent in the same post is just 30 months. Why, you ask? Well, according to the survey, the top areas of dissatisfaction with the job contributing to this high rate of churn are mundane tasks at 51%, frustration at events beyond their control, which is 45%, the ability to allocate time effectively, inability to allocate time ineffectively, 30%, and a pressure cooker environment, 29%. No matter where you sit regarding security analysts' job dissatisfaction, considering the fact that we have a lack of qualified people to fill cybersecurity roles, these results are troubling. The article's author writes that morale could easily be improved with a better career path planning process, better integration with the business, and increased use of automation to help reduce the amount of missed or false positive security alerts. All right, that's all we have for the headlines today. Please check back on Thursday when we'll have the latest happening on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. And until then, please check the sites often and daily to see the latest that we have on the sites. Thank you. Great. Have a great day. Bye.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I'm here once again with Todd Weber, who is the CTO of Americas at Optiv Security. Todd, welcome back to TechStrong TV. How you doing?
I'm great, Charlene. Thanks for inviting me back.
Yes. Well, I'm excited that you're back here. You were on TechStrong TV in the early days when we first got started. We were talking about work from home security and the pandemic and how organizations are kind of dealing with everything. So now we're about 6 months in, and things are, I guess, very much the same as they were, but it seems like everybody's kind of starting to settle into the way things are kind of working now with organizations. And yeah, it's been kind of an interesting ride so far because we hit the height, what we thought was the height, and then things started kind of going down, and people were starting to relax a little bit. Maybe some people are starting to go back into the office, but now we're talking about the idea of perhaps the pandemic or COVID-19 kind of becoming more of a seasonal thing. It's something that Dr. Fauci mentioned that he thinks that it might be something that is kind of seasonal, kind of like the flu, although I don't want to compare it to the flu, but, so what does this mean actually for organizations when, we're talking about security? How can they kind of deal with this new way of thinking about work from home and hybrid work and all that?
Well, there's several things, to talk about. And number one, as you said, we've been talking about it for a while, is the whole work from home methodology. And the work from home methodology has to evolve a little bit. People did what they had to do at the outset to get people working. And in many cases that did work. However, what we find ourselves is in situations where we're going to have to start bringing the security stacks that we were used to having within our corporate environments. We got to start bringing those closer to our users. And whether or not you're using SASE methodologies or, however you want to use the phraseology there, but the zero trust concepts as well as the SASE concepts of converging all of those factors like secure web gateway and everything else and get those closer to our users in some way, shape, or form that doesn't rely on people being in offices. And as you say, if it becomes a seasonal thing, well, we need to plan on it kind of being a permanent thing. Or design solutions that are very elastic, that can scale up and scale down very quickly. And that also gets into the other side of like our application side. As if we have to go back down into some form of lockdown, then I mean, when I say the lockdown, I don't mean to use that term, but in some form of restricted function, we need to be prepared, a little bit better prepared, to where businesses may have to again shift their revenue streams from being brick and mortar all the way to electronic, and their infrastructures have to account for that. And so the application sides need to be, and then that's the whole digital transformation function that we talked about last time. And just to where people need to be prepared to be able to spin those up and down and be very elastic in their scalability, and they need to be extensible so that you can change them very quickly and add items and get items off and add shippers and third party. But and then throughout this whole thing is understanding where the risks are to visibility, because now you're dealing with things that you haven't normally dealt with in the past. And, with newer type applications, as well as say, you're using Kubernetes or something for these applications, there are going to be visibility structures that you're going to have to address that just weren't there in your typical security infrastructure side, or on the work from home side, dealing with the whole BYOD thing and where data has gone during this whole pandemic, corporate data, private data, PCI data, privacy data, all of the ones that are controlled aspects that we've kind of had to, let loose some controls to address, to deal with our situation here.
Right. So, it obviously this time around, or this next time around, if we do kind of, revert back to the way things were when, the pandemic first hit and everybody was sent home. Obviously the difference between then and now is now we have time to plan. Before it was kind of scrambling to make sure that everybody had what they needed to be able to do their work remotely. But obviously there were, I don't want to say mistakes that were made, but there were certainly lessons learned that arose from these, quick pivots. And, organizations, I think, are going to take a much more concerted effort this time to make sure that they are addressing the security concerns that a company working from home and in remote areas versus working in the office. And the infrastructure is a very, very large part of that. So do you, you mentioned, having this elastic network that can scale up or down as needed, but do you think that more organizations are going to look at maybe shifting the majority of their workloads into the cloud and applications into the cloud? Or, are we looking at more, data center infrastructures that are just going to kind of be built out to accommodate large swaths of employees working remotely?
It's an interesting question. And, from an overall standpoint, workloads are moving and shifting towards the cloud anyway before the pandemic. And so, it has shifted a bit more, I guess, rapidly, I would say, to address more of that side of like your revenue streams have to all change from brick and mortar because the stores were all closed for a while.
Right.
And then moving to, some sort of digital transformation side of things. But overall, I do think organizations are going to take a much more methodical approach, meaning like, okay, we have to really look at our identity side of things. The identity programs now become the core crux of everything, because what you're trying to define, it doesn't matter, like I said, in your zero trust or SASE form of things, identity is the initial outset of everything. Instead of saying, 1.1.1.1 has access to 2.2.2.2 on port 4, you want to have John has access to Office 365, during these times with these contexts. And those contexts can mean different things. Am I on my home computer or am I on a corporate asset? And, that's what I mean by methodical. You have to look at all of those contexts. And we do have time now. And that's where I think people are shifting their priorities to start taking those steps to make those, not just the tool sets, but also the logical thought processes for how we need to address and how we need to have our workforce be pretty much, effectively 100% remote.
So I know a lot of folks, when they were sent home, a lot of them actually ended up using their own devices to be able to get their work done. And so whether that was their personal laptop or their work laptop that they just brought home, their smartphone, their tablets. I mean, there were all manner of devices that were connecting to the network, and obviously not all of those were connected securely. So now we're talking about having to manage multiple devices that belong to a particular employee. And so obviously identity and access are two very, very large issues that you just discussed. But we're also talking about the overall security of those devices in connecting to the network. So do you see kind of companies maybe taking a second look at their mobile device management efforts and maybe either enhancing or just starting from scratch, if you will, rebuilding their mobile device management strategies?
Well, I definitely see that convergence towards securing your mobile devices or securing whatever device that it may be. And I talked about the context of, trusted users getting to trusted applications. The third leg of that stool is on a trusted asset. And that context of how trustworthy is the asset that you're running on is very important. And as you said, we had to do what we had to, and whether or not that was through mobile devices or whatever. I think you can take a few different approaches here. One, doing exactly that, getting, those assets to be more trusted, and then contextually putting those assets into, okay, if I have these conditions and the mobile asset is in the United States and it's, under these contexts, and it's, have these applications on it from these app stores with these policy controls, and whether or not you're using Jamf or Zimperium or however you're doing your policy checks, then they have access to my trusted applications, meaning Salesforce, or whatever they may be, or SAP on these devices. But if they don't have those contexts, maybe I offer more limited forms, or I shift them over to a VDI context, which, many people have done the virtual desktop infrastructure side as well to just proxy to get to those trusted assets. So the different approaches for different folks, but again, it's taking that methodical approach to what's best for your industry and your company.
It's interesting that you mentioned the virtual desktop infrastructure. VDI has been obviously around for, at least 20 years or so. And it's one of those things that's kind of always been the background, but I think this may be its moment to shine. I think, a lot of companies are taking a second look at VDI technology and recognizing it can be a valuable tool for a lot of organizations in helping their employees kind of make that connection between home and work. So I'm always fascinated to hear about all these technologies that have been around for a while but are now kind of finding their place in the spotlight with COVID. So do you think that VDIs will actually become more of a ubiquitous technology as time goes on, and we actually may be seeing a seasonal kind of shift back to the office and then back home?
Definitely some form of VDI. What I see the unfortunate side of that is we had to hurry. So there are different forms of VDI, and whether or not you're using real virtual desktop, or many people had to do remote desktop protocol, which has led to a lot of the ransomware problems, just the inherent insecurities with RDP. So, I mean, while I say yes to VDI, we want to do it in a very specific way that is in a secure way that not only secures the communication channels, but also is secure in the way that we access those applications, and that those virtual desktop applications are actually secure as well, because you kind of defeat the purpose if you can't do that.
Exactly. Well, Todd, I know that there's a lot going on and there's a lot to think about as organizations kind of shift gears once again to make sure that both their networks and their employees are safe. And really, who's to say what's going to be happening 6 months from now? So let's put it on the calendar now for you to come back in 6 months and we'll have another update.
Sure. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about happier things. And
there you go.
How great it is when we went out to dinner the night before or something.
Oh, what a wonderful thought that is. All right. Well, hey, thanks so much for taking the time and meeting with me again on TechStrong TV. I really do appreciate it.
No, thank you. Appreciate it, Charlie.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops. I'm here now with the Tuesday edition of the Webinars Preview. As always, we have a lot of great webinars on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard, but I wanted to let you know about 3 that are happening very soon in the hopes that you can mark your calendar and join us. The first one is called The Future of Active Host Vulnerability Monitoring. It's happening tomorrow, October 21st at 11 a.m. on Security Boulevard. That's 11 a.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. It's sponsored by Lacework. In the era of the cloud generation, the constant activity around workloads and containers can create more vulnerabilities than an organization is able to handle. So this webinar takes a look at how organizations can streamline their host and container vulnerability workflows for their software teams that are building in AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and Kubernetes. The second webinar is called DevOps from a different data set, what 30 million workflows reveal about high-performing teams. This one is happening tomorrow also, Wednesday, October 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This is a really fascinating webinar. It is sponsored by CircleCI, and it offers a view into anonymized team data from millions of DevOps workflows to share insights, behaviors, and metrics that can help teams build better software faster, and also take a look at some of the characteristics of success that we can measure through data. It's really, really interesting. CircleCI has taken a bunch of metrics that it has gathered from its customers and other organizations that are quote unquote doing DevOps and pulled out some insights that hopefully will be actionable for anybody who's watching the webinar. It also covers what can be inferred from team behavior and provides those takeaways that are so important to benchmark the performance of software delivery teams. Definitely one worth checking out if you have the time and the inclination. The third webinar today I want to let you know about is called Digital Transformation in a Kubernetes World. It's also happening Wednesday, October 21st at 3 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It looks like we've got all Wednesday's webinars this week. This is sponsored by RTS Labs. The webinar takes a look at the complexities of undergoing digital transformation, which is a tough nut to crack for any organization. And then when you add in an extra layer of Kubernetes, it can be downright daunting for most organizations. So the presenters of this webinar are going to discuss how to pull off a successful digital transformation in a Kubernetes world, and we'll cover the business implications of implementing a new architecture, the tools and processes organizations should consider as an engineering leader. And they're also going to provide some of the right questions that organizations should be asking themselves to determine whether Kubernetes and microservices are the right direction for their organization. All right, that's all I have for you today. Please check back on Thursday when we'll have another edition of the Webinars Preview. Until then, please have a great day and stay safe. Hey guys, next up on TechStrong TV, Mitchell Ashley joins us, and he's going to be doing his Analyst Corner, and he's got a great interview with Keith Stewart, who is the CEO of vArmor. So please give it a listen.
Welcome to Analyst Corner. Mitch Ashley, CEO of the Accelerated Strategies Group. This week is DevOps Experience 2020. I was fortunate to be part of it last year, talking about digital transformation. This year, I'm taking a little bit of a different tact. Now, I'm going to be part of a very broad conference, a lot of great people, a lot of great speakers. Definitely recommended that you check out all of it. You can go to devopsexperience.io, register for the conference. It's free. Look at the speaker list, look at the agenda, see what might be interesting to you. You also have a chance to view the content after the conference too, so be sure to sign up. I'm going to be joined by Alex Hidalgo on Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, we're going to be talking about SRE and service level objectives. If you don't know Alex, he recently joined Noble 9, but he comes from a wealth of experience. He's written over 20 publications and talks about SRE, and he really has learned it on the job. He describes it as, we should go find somebody to write a book about that for this. And his peers, coworkers said, well, you are the expert. You go write it. So he just finished actually writing a book about service level objectives. Now, I know about SLAs from contracts and overall service metrics, but it's a neat idea to apply something like that to an operations role and to a systems or an applications reliability environment. So he'll go into that in quite a bit of detail. You can check out his book on Amazon.com. Just search for Alex Hidalgo. It's Hidalgo. And his book is Service Level Objectives. You can find it there. Very interesting. Now, we're going to be having a kind of round, open talk, I would say. He and I are going to be having a discussion on our talk on Thursday. And rather than slides and pitches and, the normal kind of courseware that you might find in a conference, and there'll be a lot of that good kind of stuff there too. We're just going to have a free-form discussion. Alex was recently on TechStrong TV with me, and we had a really great conversation. That's what led actually to having this session during DevOps Experience. So we're going to talk about site reliability and engineering, the efforts that companies are putting into it, the effectiveness, what we've learned, even a little bit of chaos engineering, some of those kind of concepts, a little bit about his new book, of course. Any author, you need to give them a chance to talk about their book so that they can get the word out. And hopefully that word's gotten out about Alex's new books. So I hope that you'll join us, and you can always get a preview of what we might talk about. It won't be exactly the same. On digitalanarchist.com, just search for Alex Hidalgo on TechStrong TV. And of course, join us this Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Hope we see you there. Hope we see you at the whole conference. There'll be a lot of good content to check out. Have a great day.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Well, I'm really pleased to have as my guest today Keith Stewart, who's CER with vArmor. Welcome. Good to have you, Keith.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Good to have you. So vArmor, probably a lot of folks know who you are, but it'd be great to have you introduce yourself and also a little bit about vArmor.
Yeah, sure. That sounds great. vArmor produces application relationship management software and technology. We help people understand how their applications are connected, who's talking to what, whether that's a good idea that they should be talking to each other. So if A is talking to B and B is talking to C, A and C are connected, right? There's a relationship there that's really hard to see in sort of a static event-oriented model. So we help people understand those relationships and help people secure them. I've been with the company now for quite a while. I build all this stuff, so I run product here at the company and get to spend a whole lot of time talking with some really smart people about how we make security and IT better.
Excellent, excellent. Well, great products from your company. Enjoy talking with you. I know that you had an announcement a few weeks back. It's not old enough to be old news, but I definitely want to kind of check in. I think you did an announcement about relationship search.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So what we've classically done is we'll plug into your existing infrastructure, whether that's cloud or classic on-prem, whether you've got agents or network elements or whatever. We'll sit on top of that digital exhaust stream and pull out all the information and transform that into that relationship map to allow you to do application relationship management. What we've been hearing more and more from people is there's so much power that lives in that information for different use cases and different users in the environment. They want to be able to customize how they look at the data. And so we've released relationship search, which lets you, whether you're a security operator, whether you're an IT administrator, go and ask specific queries to our graph, to our underlying relationship map, in order to learn things that matter to you. So one example, Mitch, that comes up a lot these days is ransomware. So I think I've had a ransomware incident, and I think it's, my web server that serves up the company's cafe menu list that got the source of infection. Where did that propagate? How did that go, right? Those are relationships, right, that are going from A to B to C to D, just like we were talking about. Relationship search lets you build custom queries into that relationship map in order to say, all right, I think I got hit with Wasted Locker. What does that mean? And how is that going to, how did that propagate around in my environment? What's the limit of the scope of that incident that I've had? And as I've done that, of course, now I know what I've got to remediate. I can start prioritizing remediation. I can say which of these assets are critical resources. God forbid, which of them have data on them that is critical that I get backed up immediately, or that I go find my backups immediately. All of that becomes possible when I can see the map of propagation across my environment.
Excellent. Sounds like it's extremely useful. When is it mostly? Give some other scenarios, use cases, when you have an attack or some event that you may be researching around a security incident. Are there other examples of the situations where that would really come in handy?
Totally. So talking about ransomware, I was talking through the lens of a post-incident investigation, right? Something's gone bad, and I now need to go and look at it. There is just as many interesting use cases that are around pre-incident planning. So if I am trying to model the way an attack might move through my environment, I can look at that. One example that I thought was really cool was somebody pumped their vulnerability data into the graph. So I see all of my applications, and I know that that's the cafe menu server. This is my Swift payment infrastructure, and over there is my retail banking environment. But they pump in their vulnerability data into that, so now I can see an individual workload, what level of CVE is currently in place on that system. And maybe I haven't patched them yet or what have you. I can now run a search and say, show me a cyber risk map. Show me the path through all of those applications that for all workloads that have a CVE of level 5 or above. And a CVE level 5 more or less means that there's a remote exploit path associated with it. So I literally, with a simple query, can build an exploit map on my environment. Now, obviously, that's information that is quite sensitive, but better that we know it than the bad guys know it. Mm-hmm. So I can see that map. I can understand how someone might propagate. And I can also then say, well, from that map, what asset that I might compromise there is right next door to something critical. So I can see how close to something that I care about that someone can get. Are they just getting up to that cafe menu server, or are they really finding their way into my Swift payment infrastructure where they can get some real damage and get some real money out of that?
It's interesting. It almost sounds like, we're all very familiar with pen testing as security professionals. This is almost an app connection testing where you can start to map what are the potential paths through my software, where are there potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited. And oftentimes it may not be just one obvious one, right? It's always the get in here, escalate to here, right? And that's where the real insight and value comes from.
Totally right. And that works interestingly enough, both on the security lines, but I think also on the IT operations side of the house. Because I thought you said it well as you were talking about the potential impact. This is as useful for change as well, right? I have this particular application that I'm going to run it through a migration, or I'm going to bounce all of these servers. What are the affected populations around them, right? Which people, which applications need to be notified? Can I model in advance what the potential impact of this is? These are all just searches of the different relationships and connectivity paths between your applications.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious if you might be able to detect something like, maybe not as low level as a rootkit, but someone installing software that shouldn't be there, then now talking to your applications, interacting with it, siphoning off transactions or communications, or injecting things that it shouldn't.
Yeah, I think that you've got some really interesting insights there. Classically, security is not about sort of one indicator that tells you, haha, here is the bad guy, right? It's a series of different indicators, and increasingly it's indicators that cross different domains, right? So I need to combine this piece of information about what's happening down at the bottom of an operating system with this piece of network telemetry about communications paths, with this piece of information about a change that took place. What we've brought to the table that we think is interesting and unique is the understanding of relationships. So you're able to view that data through the lens of how your different applications or systems talk to one another. Classically, we approach these problems, whether they're the security problem or the IT operations problem, as an event stream. Here's a never-ending stream of events. I'm going to try and correlate the events together, but they're all individual atomic pieces, and they end up being really disconnected away from how the business thinks about things. And the way the business thinks about things is, I've got a series of applications that access data together, produce a business outcome. So put these different events in context of the applications and the potential impact of the business of those applications, and suddenly we're having a much more interesting conversation with the executive team. So that's, I think, where relationships, whether they're at the macro that says, here is how my production systems are talking to my dev systems, or here's how retail banking is interacting with investment banking, or all the way down to the micro that says, hey, I have this one instance that's sitting in AWS that's communicating with a Lambda function and communicating horizontally into Azure. I should have no horizontal communication there. What's that chain? And I've never seen that Lambda function before 2 days ago. Something's odd. I need to go and understand this.
Hey, do we have any serverless applications? No? Okay, well,
nope, none at all.
Interesting. Well, congratulations on the announcement, the new release. Is this generally available now, or is it coming?
Generally available now. We've in fact had this out in front of a bunch of customers for a while. What's really fun about this is a lot of people look at the relationship map that we have today as a sort of Google Earth for the enterprise, right? Where I can be looking from way high up and then zoom all the way down to street view and looking at the front door of a building or a house. Relationship search is kind of like Google search for the enterprise. And we've started to see trending come out of this, and as we learn more about how people use the technology. And that's where some of these insights are coming on. What do people really care about today? What matters to them today? What are the searches that people are looking at today? This is really exciting.
I was actually going to bring that up as an analogy, but then I didn't know if you would like the thought of AdWords and ads appearing in your relationship search. But anyway, so if you don't mind, let's step back for a minute. I mean, there's a lot of studies. We've done some work, some research around the impact of COVID and acceleration of digital transformation projects. Our research showed that over 60% of organizations have accelerated their digital strategy. Some people say as high as 97%. What's your observation about how the last 3-4 months has started to impact the way dev and ops and DevSecOps are working together around security, especially as we I call it this hyper digital experience age that we're creating, right? It's like we've been moving into it. Now we're moving into it at warp speed.
Totally. I mean, the top two things that we've seen, the first, exactly as you say, is the acceleration of digital transformation projects and getting a more digital business model, a digital way of interacting with your clients, and driving more and more innovation through that, which has all of the downstream requirements around DevSecOps that you're highlighting. The other is an intense focus on resiliency, right? So even in the part of the estate that I'm not going to transform, I have to improve and increase the resiliency of that estate consistently, because so much of the business and the economics of the company now end up being dependent on all of these systems working together. So I think we see both of those being a place where people are putting a ton of energy. From our perspective, we're very fortunate that in both the DevSecOps case and in the sort of increasing the resiliency and legacy, understanding relationships is a big step forward in solving those problems. So we're seeing a lot of uptake around application relationship management. The company has been very successful over this time period in helping people try and solve some of these problems. There's real cost that can be taken out of the business and real acceleration that can be brought to the business by embracing these models. And it's a very exciting time from a technologist perspective.
Interesting. How have you seen the priorities for CISOs, security teams change? I think we all would say remote workers, things like that. Are there others you've seen that are showing up higher up the priority list, or maybe weren't on the list before?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think the remote worker piece kind of leads you forward, right? The sort of early days of COVID were all about, how do I have continuity of business, right? How do I have people still able to do work and customers still able to interact with the business and do work with them? So we had a client who was running around trying to find a bunch of old end-of-life Cisco ASA concentrators just because they needed more capacity, and that was an approved platform in the bank, and so they had to go do this and get that out.
The old VPN concentrators.
Yeah, it's an oldie but goodie. What we've been seeing recently is the sort of initial fervor of a continuity of business argument driving rapid change. There is now this sort of a little bit of get back to normal, but there's also this, hey, we have built up a bunch of risk in that time, and we understood the risk, and we accepted the risk because of continuity of business requirements. But now we need to go back and revisit that risk. We need to maybe, in the most direct sense, find another alternative to those Cisco ASAs, but also all of my risk management and monitoring, whether it's on the application side or the end user side, needs to be rethought from a workforce that is distributed, but as much for a customer base that's distributed, right? A digital transformation project is a recognition that customers are more and more going to be engaging through electronic means and not through classic storefronts or points of presence. So managing the risk of the business becoming more digital is at the top of every project that we're a part of these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that it's the continuity of business, protection of our own information. But now, if you're engaging in customers in new ways, right, you may be collecting new kinds of data about them that you didn't collect before, interacting with them, maybe even hours of operations. Right now, you're a 24/7 business where you maybe weren't before in a storefront kind of location. How about at the same time where most organizations are dealing with regulations and privacy, California, in Europe, how is that impacting the rapid change? Because sometimes you're just tough to balance all of those balls in the air at the same time.
Well, I think what we're seeing is, at least from our lens, is the sort of continued transformation of those sectors and verticals as well, whether you're thinking sort of risk and compliance and audit and privacy, that the sort of same original notions that drove a DevOps mentality that said, hey, there's a better way of doing this. If I can chop things up into smaller and smaller pieces and create sort of full stack models and have people go, if I was able to do that with something as complex as network or storage or even the underlying compute is an intensely complex topic. then I should be able to do it for topics like compliance and risk. And so we've been spending a lot of time with companies lately working on recognizing that the sources of input there that come from the compliance teams or the audit teams or the risk teams are as amenable to code as a sort of classic developer who says, hey, give me some servers, please. Mm-hmm. And if you can build those systems into a sort of policy and discovery as code model, you actually end up with an overall better outcome for the business, because that then can be integrated into the pipeline in such a way where it is either at worst transparent to the developer, or at best actually intrinsically adding incremental value back to them as a side effect of it. And everybody ends up in a better place. So let me give you an example. One of the projects that we've built out with one of our clients involves taking the discovery and the visualization technology, this understanding of relationships that we've been talking about, and building it into their pipeline. So that when a dev kicks off a new build and Jenkins does its magic and pulls the stuff together, and then we fire the thing up in integration test, we'll actually model the build and model the interactions between components before the thing's ever hit prod. And so suddenly you've got a dev who gets a completely self-discovered and self-described application, so they don't have to do any of that work anymore. The security teams no longer need to go and check the dev's work, because they're no longer worried about some dev saying, well, my app needs unfettered access to the internet. Yeah. Security guys are like, no.
Open it up.
Yeah,
I might need it.
I might need it one day. So you get that sort of benefit there. And the net result is velocity, right? All the dev wants to do is get his code out, right? He's got the business telling him that for continuity of business, this service must go live. The more we can take things like security or compliance or risk, turn them into software and embed them into the pipeline, the better off everybody is.
You're hitting like center of the bullseye of something I'm passionate about. Is you mentioned data exhaust. With the automation of software integration, we create tons of information, and most of that sort of is left on the cutting room floor, right? And using a Hollywood metaphor, but if you could make a developer's life easier by saying, that compliance process you get to do every 6 months where folks show up and you got to go back and get a bunch of stuff for them. Here you go. Here's a third of it. Here's half of it. Here's 2/3 of it. We know our architecture is consistent because we've looked at the relationship mapping and it's consistent, or we made these changes and that's exactly still what's in production, as well as, scanning and all the other kind of things you might do from a security perspective. I mean, auditors are going to love it, right? Because you can instantly produce a lot of that content. So I'm encouraged to hear you're working on these kind of projects.
Totally. Interestingly enough, one of the organizations we work with, they have gone full GitOps in their model. Your auditor comment brought these guys to mind for me. Because what they've said is, look, Git will be the repo of record for everything. And so anytime we have new applications that come in, they declare relationships between each other. There's an approval that says that A is allowed to talk to B, but it's not allowed to talk to C. We now have all of that information with a chain of evidence associated with it. It's all memorialized. It's all searchable. So when an auditor comes in, they can get any level of information that they want. The chain of custody on it is strong. And the devs are working in GitOps, and they're like, "This is fantastic! You mean this approval process is a pull request? Fantastic! I like that. That's way better than
Is this a dream? Somebody wake
Yeah,
up.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Well, on Tuesday you're going to need to go to the GCR meeting, and then from that you'll get a ticket that allows you to apply for entrance in the TPQ session, which is every third Wednesday of the month. Like, no. All that goes away. Just make the whole thing an automated process and on we go.
Interesting. I think that's fantastic. Well, any interesting things coming up for vArmor or things that you're doing?
We do have some really cool stuff coming down the pipe. We think that this idea of relationships and the larger notion of application relationship management has the power to be transformative. So in our mind, there are many, many more kinds of relationships that can be brought into a relationship map and give you richer and richer insights on what's happening in your environment. So watch this space, because we'll have some interesting stuff coming out in the next couple of weeks that talk about kind of the next sets of relationships that we'll be tackling, and frankly, why we think that's so important, especially in a post-COVID world.
Well, good luck with those announcements. Look forward to keep us informed. Come back, tell us more about it when the time's right, and we're happy to have you join us again.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for having me.
You bet. It's been a great conversation. My guest today, Keith Stewart, CEO with vArmor, and fun talking about security, and I can't believe I'm saying fun talking about compliance, but it is fun.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Mitch.
You bet. Thank you.
CI/CD pipe and put your observability on. Ground control to Major Tom.
10, 9, ignition sequence
countdown, engines on.
6, 5,
check ignition 4, and may God's love be with you.
Welcome back to TechStrong TV. We've got a double dose of Mike Vizards on today's broadcast. First up, he's going to be talking with Sunray CEO Brendan Hannigan. They're going to be talking about security and microservices. Really, really fascinating conversation. After that, he's going to be talking about the folks from the IBM Code for Good initiative, talking about climate change and the impact IT can have on small farming as they adjust to climate change. Fascinating talk. So please give it a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Brendan Hannigan, CEO of Sunray Security. They've just landed $20 million in additional funding. Brendan, congratulations.
Thanks very much, Mike. We're delighted.
And what is the plan for the cash immediately? I mean, is there something you guys feel you need to do, or is it just going into operations, or where do we go from here?
A couple of things. Firstly, we obviously have invested a lot in engineering in our platform. There's a lot of invention in it, and there's a lot of invention still to go. So if you remember, we've had we're going, the problem we're going after is essentially monitoring public cloud environments like customers' AWS, Azure, Google cloud environments, and automatically finding and eliminating risk in those environments. And in particular, there's a lot of risk around identity and data. We have a particular invention in that area, a graphing technology, which helps us do that. And so there's just a lot of other innovation to just help make this as efficient and fast as possible and as easy as possible for our clients. So that's one thing. We've had some successful, very large deployments this year. And I think actually that's one of the things that has really helped Menlo. And so we will now look to expand our reach. So naturally at this stage, if you have successful deployments with large enterprises, we have a nice invention. Now we want to be able to expand our marketing efforts. We have to market, we have to get the customers, and we got to expand our sales efforts, including we've got some customers internationally, and we'd like to expand just everywhere, quite honestly, Mike. So a lot of investment in sales and marketing, but certainly we have to continue to invest in our engineering efforts.
You've been at this security game for some time now. What is your sense of the current state of security? Are things getting better? Are they worse? Things are more complex. What's your overall sense of where we are?
It's a tale of, there's two parts of that tale, Mike. And in the end, there's been phenomenal awareness of the problem of security. We know that. Secondly, while that's happened, investment has increased. There's been super phenomenal innovations in certain investments, everything from traditional data center SOAR and investments in endpoint technologies, which have made a difference for enterprises. But obviously, there's two other things which have happened. The sophistication of the attackers has gone up and will just keep going up and up. This is where we all know where this is where the value lies. And then there's this other big change, which is related to public cloud, and it's what our business is about. And what, and I know we've spoken about this before, but the way in which we build technology has changed dramatically. And we build technology now in a microservices architecture, not monolithic. We build it with distributed DevOps teams. We have infrastructure in code just being delivered into the cloud, whereas in the past we'd call up IT and have them configure a firewall. And so I think this has huge promise to be able to deliver better security. But I think customers have to realize, and we all as an industry have to realize, the way we approach it has to be 100% totally different. We have to do a better job, and it's going to require a new approach. And so I think that piece of it hasn't quite sunk in yet, and that's basically a big part of the evangelization we have to do. The cloud offers much better potential for much better cybersecurity. It is actually, if you think about the atom splitting moment where you suddenly go, my God, what's the invention that could change it here? It actually is the cloud, but it has to be approached very differently than how we approach a traditional enterprise network and data center, which is essentially what we're trying to do at Sunrise Security.
Do you think that the shift to microservices is in turn going to force this transition where we're talking about DevSecOps and more responsibility shifts to the left? And if that's the case, developers are playing more of that role, then what's the relationship back to the security team? How is that all going to evolve from your perspective?
So firstly, one thing that's clear is this whole move, it's driven by digital disruption. It's driven by business mandates, right? There's businesses in the world which are innovating. How we build Sunrise Security actually is incredibly different than how a previous company and a successful company we were part of, Q1 Labs, was built. I mean, the business system, how we write software, where we put that software, totally different, right? That's a digital disruption, and it's forcing companies to change. It's forcing them to adopt the DevOps approach. It's forcing them to adopt microservices and to move quickly. That has to happen. It is happening. They have no choice. So that's the first thing. To ask your question then, what are one of the fundamental changes? One of the fundamental changes is actually establishing a working mechanism between the security teams and these DevOps teams. You can't take it all. It's not an all or nothing thing here where it's like, oh my God, let's shift it all. It's all perfect. And the developers produce perfect code with these tools. That's crazy. But then also there's no way we've actually had customers where they had manual risk reviews of identity risk for workloads going into the cloud. Well, that just doesn't work in this world. That's the way it used to work. I'm going to have a manual review of where I'm going to put the switch in the router. Well, now that infrastructure is showing up in a Terraform or a cloud formation template. There's no manual reviews of that. So we can't have manual reviews by security teams and manual processes and then these old ways of looking at security. And then we also can't just say, you know what, everything's great. The code is perfect and it's all coming out and it's all sort of in the code and so it's all fine. In reality, how do we establish a working operational model that actually pushes the things that make sense to the DevOps teams, but keeps the security teams in the loop? That actually is critical in this world. And it's one of the biggest challenges that we aim to help our customers with.
One of the things you hear a lot about these days is also this notion of tracking things by their identity, giving everything some sense of identity, whether it's the microservice, the machine, or maybe even the end user, of course, has their own identity. How do we do that? And how are we going to figure out how to assign identity and then keep track of it when the environment itself is very dynamic? A microservice that was here today is gone tomorrow.
I like to do if we think of any, what's not uncommon, and certainly in the world that you talk and write about all the time, right? It's not unusual in the public cloud environment to have, say, a couple of hundred AWS accounts, maybe 50, 100 Azure subscriptions, some number of Google projects. And in there could be 80,000 distinct pieces of compute, 20,000 active at any point in time. In those pieces of compute, they could be containers, they could be serverless functions. No serverless functions have a life counted in minutes max, right? And they have identities. So to your point, what's the change? We've gone from X number of employees getting access to an ERP application in the very old world to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of little identities, and they do have rights. That's what I like to say. Serverless functions have rights too. So now you look at it and you say, everything we did in the past for tracking rights and certification and risk associated with identities, there's no way it can work in a microservices workload, which is deposited with infrastructure as code, dropped into cloud and operating for a few minutes and going about doing its job in an extreme sense. It has to be tracked with technology, and it has to be tracked in an automated fashion. So only the most critical risks, which can't be fixed automatically, are surfaced, and everything else can be done in an automated fashion, which is, again, one of the big things in our funding and the big reason our company exists is we build this graph to track all those relationships in these clouds. And then we have an excellent understanding of all access by all identities, human beings, containers, serverless functions through multiple levels of interactions, maybe through a vault, a HashiCorp vault, and usage of keys. And now we can actually understand those rights and understand where risks are. And it has to happen automatically, and it has to happen with, incredibly smart technology.
And how does that work exactly? I think people are generally familiar with the notion of a graph, but how does it track in real time what's happening as the environment changes? I'm sure there's a lot of security people who are going, what's a graph and how does that work? So just walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so think about actually, so when we have these environments, as I described, hundreds of accounts, inside those accounts, there can be partitions that are put in place, like VPCs. Inside them, there's compute running, and they can have lots of different forms. And the reality is, if there's one thing about cloud, if you remember in the old days and the old enterprise network and data centers, there's always the dream of the CMDB, which we all got frustrated with because it was never perfectly up to date. The beautiful thing about cloud actually is it's very well instrumented because somebody has to pay for all of this stuff. So the cloud providers are not going to let something go unnoticed and uninstrumented. And so there's ways to collect activity, which is what we do. We're able to collect activity through mechanisms of APIs and log analysis, actually, to understand what's happening. As things happen, then we gather that information. We have analytics which look and say, what's the implication of that change, of that new instance, that new privilege? It is complicated, Mike, because in any one of these cloud providers, there are thousands and thousands of potential privileges and rights which can be applied in a dynamic microservices environment. We have to understand every single one of those thousands of rights and privileges and its implication. And what we do is we map it to the entity, and then we build a relationship to say, what does that allow that entity to do? Can it, for example, assume a role? And if that role can further assume a role into another account, now we know that this entity, through a variety of different levels of interactions and maybe combinations of privileges, actually has access to data that may be far away from that entity. And then we say, is it being used or not? That's the purpose of the graph. It's a connectivity to basically tell us we understand how all these things are interconnected. Then we run analytics on top of the graph. So the first piece is collections. The second piece is analytics to understand the implication. We have to understand every privilege and how it can be applied to everything else. And then we basically build these interconnections. And then we run analytics to say, where are the risks? What are the risks? What do we care about? Is this PII? Is this not PII? And where is it? Now, you can imagine in any scale, I think some customers grossly underestimate the complexities and the risks that are hidden in their clouds. And this is becoming more aware. Bigger companies are realizing, goodness, we have customers and prospects who the internal audit team suddenly looks at the cloud and they go, my goodness, I didn't realize this was happening in here. And they start to get worried about it. But I think in general, bigger companies are getting an awareness of this risk, but for smaller companies, they probably aren't fully appreciative of the amount of risk which is hidden in their clouds. And that's what we want to help them understand.
Do you think anybody could really pass a thorough audit and in terms of the governance of all those different microservices and really understand what the relationship is between those things? Because people are given permissions to things that give permissions to things, and no one really knows exactly what's happening. So how do we kind of figure out this compliance area beyond just checking boxes, but how do we?
Exactly. And this is actually, it's interesting. Compliance, we've always said this in security. Risk, security first will give for us amazing compliance to actual audits. If you think of how quick innovation happens, right? Are the auditors always going to be ahead of the latest service that shows up in Amazon? And the answer is you and I both know. And the auditors know. How can they keep up with that all the time? So it's our job to help them keep up with that. I actually think in a very constrained way for simple projects, people can actually do kind of manual analysis of this and see, oh, I feel comfortable with these rights. Once it explodes out into many different teams, huge projects, dynamically changing, new deliveries every week, this becomes unsustainable manually, and you need a sophisticated engine to look at it. Even that engine has to be doing and fixing things in an automated fashion. And is it then possible? I can assure you, our objective and what we've done, we've reduced kind of policy checking requirements for companies from weeks down to less than a day, just in terms of past time, purely by automating this entire process. And that's what will increasingly, I think companies are realizing this is what has to happen. And the traditional approaches of certification, we know how these work. In the old days, does Brendan have rights to get access to that ERP application or that Salesforce application? And how long should he have it? Those types of processes are insufficient for a microservices application where we're talking about a serverless function which has got access through multiple different layers of indirection to an RDS instance and a field level in a database. Who's keeping track of that? Well, somebody has to your point, and that's why we exist.
All right. It sounds like there's some hope for us after all. Hey, Brendan, thanks for being on the show.
Really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time.
All right, guys, back to you in the studio.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the feed. We're here with Daniel Crook, who's the CTO for Call for Code. And we have two of the latest winners of the Call for Code awards. They are Manuela Marai, CEO of Agrily, or how do I say that, guys?
Yes, Agrily.
Agrily?
That's correct.
And we're here also with Ajinka Delatacour, who is the CTO. Folks, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Daniel, walk us through a little bit. I'm sure that you guys are living and dying by Call for Code, but I'm not sure everybody who's watching this may know what it's about. So explain the program a little, what's going on and why people should be paying more attention and maybe lining up to be in the next one.
Sure. So Call for Code is an initiative we started in 2018. It was a partnership between David Clark Cause, IBM, the Linux Foundation, and the UN Human Rights Office, United Nations Human Rights Office. It's a multi-year initiative, and it's had a yearly competition each year focused around getting the world's 24 million developers to look at an important humanitarian issue and create technology solutions that can live on as sustainable open source projects. So we just concluded our third year of the program and announced our top 5, including Agrily as the winner this year.
All right, great. And as the winner, Manuela, why don't you describe what you guys did? What's the project? I know it has something to do with climate change, but I don't really know what the goal was. And maybe this is just a unique thing that nobody ever thought of before, because it never occurred to me that, we could organize farmers. So walk us through it a little bit.
Yes, first I'm so happy, extremely happy. After this winning, we didn't expect it to go so far, and we have been waiting for this moment for a long time right now. So the prize for us is a dream coming true. And Agrily, it comes really, we aim to change the farming industry, in the long run, and bringing open source benefits to empower the small scale farmers with tools to using the last technology available in the market. So current Agro is a solution that is focused on emerging markets to overcome as you said, the challenges of climate change. We provide the farmers with a long weather forecast, and we combine it with the crop requirements that is published by the UN to help small-scale farmers to make better crop decisions. So currently we have 4 features from the app. So we have a forum, a community, where the farmers can interact with them and share their knowledge. We have one that gives the forecast, a long-term, 1 year, and we have this risk management that combined with the crop. And lastly, we have agro assistants that aims to put together farmers and agronomists and companies for help them.
Very good. Jinko, we have a very technical audience, and they're kind of hardcore geeks. So can you describe the process that you used to build this app? It seems like there was a lot of people involved from different places, and I'm curious, did you use DevOps processes? Was there agile methodologies? What were you guys doing to create the workflow around a very distributed group of folks?
Yeah, surely we used DevOps, and we did use agile methodologies because 2 of our members are not present in the US. One is on field in Mongolia, and one was located in Taiwan. So it was very important for us to use agile methodologies. As for the technology goes, what we do is we take the data from the weather company. We take 2 types of data. One is the hourly forecast, and one is the weekly forecast. And then we take data for the past 5 years from NASA, and we feed all of this into IBM Watson Studio. And this is where the magic happens. We run regression on the data, and we generate annual weather forecast. When the user, when he logs into the app and he goes to the annual weather forecast page, he sees all this data. As for the crop management part goes, what we do is we take the formula that is provided by United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, and we take the annual weather forecast, and we merge the two, the crop data and the annual weather forecast with the help of that formula. And we show the farmers, whether you can grow this crop or not. If the temperature is good, if there is sufficient amount of water, for example, if I'm located in Jersey City and if I want to plant tomatoes, that will tell you if I can plant tomatoes or not.
So Manuela, you're taking the risk out of it for the farmers, right? Because they used to have to take a guess as to what might happen. Do you update this app continually with the weather data? Is this something that they can look at and make a different decision, different years, different seasons? I guess I'm asking, how dynamic is the application itself?
Yes, currently what we do is we take this risk. We show to them based on the location what they can plant, and if they decided to plant the crop that he wants, what kind of difficulties he's gonna have, and everything is based on our forecast of climate change. That is why it comes climate change. It's not something that we used just last year. We do a forecast. And this is just the beginning, because we plan another risk modules to be included in the app. So we plan also the market risk that we want them to have regarding prices and forecasts. So we are going to have other risks also to help these farmers in getting a better overview of all the risks he can have.
Right. So Daniel, you wrote these guys a check. What happens next? I mean, do they become part of the IBM ecosystem somehow? Do you take them? Good question. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, so they, as the top team, they won not only a cash prize, but a set of other things to help them bring this app to life. So they won $200,000 US dollars. They won the ability to get an IBM set of volunteers, the IBM Service Corps, a set of hardware experts, software experts, business development folks, user experience experts, come together, understand where Agrily wants to go in their short, medium, and long-term goals. And that team will be assigned to help them deliver their solution in the field. So what sets Call for Code apart is not just that we recognize them this week with a great virtual event, but that their solution gets strengthened, released as open source, and lives on as a sustainable project. So we're going to meet with the Agrily team shortly, work through a design thinking process to understand their end users in more detail, where they are right now, where they want to be in, let's say, 30, 60, 90 days, and what sorts of roles they need, what help they need to help them deliver it. For example, they've got a React Native mobile app. So maybe we'll pull together some mobile application experts, look at the how that's put together, maybe bring some folks in from the weather company, some experts in helping them use that data and improve our application they have in Watson Studio for doing those long-term forecasts and kind of implement more of the ideas in Manuela's paper that you can find on their website. So just very excited to look forward to see what we can do with them, and looking forward to contributions from around the world to make this project even better.
And Ajinka, you're going to make sure they write some code, right? You're going to put them to work?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Let me come back to one point, Daniel. This is only one section of the awards, right? You have different segments for different types of things. As I understand it, you just launched a racial justice kind of program as well. So how many programs are there, and how did you decide which kinds of segments to create?
Yeah, so the original model for Call for Code when it launched in 2018 was that we would have about a 4-month hackathon, as it were, a competition for folks to understand the scope, learn from experts through tech talks, through starter kits, through code patterns that we had for using open source and IBM technology. We would judge the applications, recognize them around this time frame, and then start going with them in the first quarter of the following year. That was the model we had in the past. Now that we have a framework for doing this very well, for leveraging experts and the Linux Foundation, as well as other partners, we've added what are called spot challenges onto that global challenge model. So, for example, we had during the Beirut disaster in August, we had mobilized some folks in the Middle East to build out a blockchain-based donation platform. So we completed that challenge. We worked with Anthem on a mental health challenge recently in the X Prize, using some data to make some recommendations, improve folks' mental health during these tough times. And what you just mentioned, the Call for Code for Racial Justice, is a new program that actually started from inside of IBM. So what we did was the Black community within IBM came together, and on June 19th, we launched a program around 3 themes: police and judicial reform, legislation reform, and diverse representation. And that team had been working, those IBMers from around the company and around the world have been coming together to create some open source projects that we'll be sharing and opening up for people to contribute to next week. So very excited about all these efforts. And so Call for Code has really become a year-round program for Tech for Good, but at its heart, it always will have that open source sustainability behind whatever the program is.
What is your best advice to somebody who might want to participate in one of these programs? How do they get started? I think a lot of people get intimidated by the process and don't do anything. So how do we kind of get them involved or reach out to them?
Yeah, so what's amazing is now we have a lot of examples from previous year's winners, including Agrily. So they can go to developer.ibm.com/call-for-code, learn about their application as well as the other 4 finalists and previous year's winners. There's updates on those that you'll see. So you can kind of understand the types of applications we supported, the open source communities we've created around those. And for next year's competition, or for each of these spot challenges, what we do through the Call for Code program is help developers understand these abstract, large issues like COVID-19, climate change, and we distill out a starter kit, a use case based on some technology solution to start chipping away at that problem. And so we have IBM starter kits for that, as well as code patterns, which are beyond tutorials, beyond code samples. They're actually complete solutions to an issue using open source technology, data science, blockchain, Internet of Things, as well as various web application platforms, serverless functions, Kubernetes clusters, things like that. So Call for Code really bridges those large humanitarian issues with starter code that you can use to create something immediately, even if you're not a developer.
All right, Manuela, as the winner, what's your best advice to somebody who's going to compete in this next year, other than maybe, hiring a great coder? But at the end of the day, what would you tell people to say, hey, this is how you go win this thing?
I think dream a lot. We have a dream that was to help our country. So first we had this dream, and then we said how we can put this dream and put it together with a call for code. So we make a plan. Before we started everything, we had a plan for every week what we should do, and we agree with all the team. So I think this is one thing that is very important, is follow your dream and make sure you are aligned with the requirements of call for code.
All right. So if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life.
Yes.
Right? All right. Hey, guys, thanks for being on the show. Congratulations and best of luck. And we're looking forward to seeing who wins next year. Take care, guys.
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
All right, that's it for today's broadcast, folks. Tomorrow we will have a repeat of an earlier broadcast, but we'll be back on Thursday with a new lineup of interviews for you. So until then, please stay safe, stay well, stay strong, stay tech strong.